Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first South Area Planning Committee. My name is Peter Sieb. I'll be chairing the proceedings today. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm sounds, the exits are there, and we'll see you outside in the car park. This meeting is being recorded and streamed to YouTube, so any members of the public present should be aware that they would be recorded, even if they're not participating in the meeting, if they're just watching online. If it causes any concern, please let us know. I'll be announcing the agenda items in sequence. The planning officer will introduce the application and give any relevant updates and provide a visual representation to help members understand the context of the application. I'll then call on public speakers to present in accordance with the public speaking arrangements, which I believe you've all been made aware of, but we are under very tight time constraints with this constitution, and I will be limiting you to 3 minutes. So please, if there's a possibility of cutting short your speech because you've said what you need to, then please do, and please keep it to the relevant planning matters. I'll then ask members and officers if they have any points of clarification on the points which have been raised by the public speakers. Then we'll ask the members if they have any technical questions for the officers, and then the committee will debate the application. Members may seek further clarification during that debate, particular points from officers regarding the application or points raised by speakers through me. The officers will respond to issues and questions, and then we'll make the decision by a simple vote of hands. I hope that's clear. So without further ado, moving on to the main matter, apologies.
Chair, remember Mike Lewis, who was supposed to be a member of this committee, and is sadly not here with us.
Yes. As some of you will be aware, Councillor Mike Lewis passed away recently. He was due to be a member of this committee, and so with your permission, I'd just like to have a minute's silence. Thank you. The first item on the agenda, apologies.
I have apologies from Councillor Jenny Kenton. That's the only one.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Members, do you have any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. Just to declare an interest in application land south of Perry Street, Chard, as I am the ward member.
Thank you. Sue?
Thank you, Chairman. An interest in the land at Horton, the second application down. I am one of the division members for that area, for the Ilminster division.
Councillor Ware?
Thank you. Ward member for Chard North, which is the first application site. Also, I am, as a neighbour really, aware of the applicant and know the applicant in that the facility and that capacity. So,
just for clarity, are you declaring a prejudicial interest or just a personal interest?
No, just a personal interest as they are known to me as part of the ward.
Thank you. I see no other hands. Public question time. We have no one registered to speak, so we'll move to the schedule of planning applications to be determined by committee, which is for members to note. And then item 5, the planning application 20-03725 full land at Fry's Cottage, Cutterford's Door, Combe St Nicholas, Chard. Ian Cousins, I believe you're the planning officer.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This application is for the erection of a new dwelling house, Cutterford's Door, just to the north of Chard. This is the application site outlined in red. You can see, there we go. You can see this is the access from the main road into the site here. This again, just a zoomed in version of the map, so you can see it would to be sited here. A bit more context of an aerial photograph. You can see this is a garden centre just here, and you can see lots in the countryside, fields, woodland, and again, zoomed in, you can see the access in and the area subject to this application. In terms of photography, this is the access into the access lane from the public highway. The garden centre is just to the left of my shoulder, taking that photograph there. Once in, this is the access into the site. It's proposed to break through this hedgerow just here for the access. And once into that, beyond just into that hedgerow, that's the site looking in an easterly direction, and then just spinning around looking in a westerly direction. So the dwelling's proposed to go on that land there. This is the dwelling. The block plan, you can see access coming in to a garage, two-storey dwelling there. In terms of elevations, this is what we have here. It is rendered walls under a slate roof, timbered garage, again under a slate roof, perfectly acceptable in this location. And again, these are the other two side elevations. Just for completeness, floor plan, we just have typical living room, dining room, study, upstairs 3 bedrooms, garage with office space above. Now, the application is considered to be acceptable in all regards except for the principle of development given the location of the proposed dwelling. Now, what we've got to consider is whether or not there is a safe and convenient access to an area where there would be facilities and services that the occupiers could rely upon. Now, these roadways here are unlit and no pavements until you get to this point here, and again, just off the map before you get up to this point here. There are public rights of way that run through down here. There's another one that runs along here, and another one that runs along here. However, those public rights of way are unpaved, they're not lit, and given that, your officers consider that there would be a reliance upon the motor car to be able to access facilities and services. Given that the reliance on the motor car is considered an unsustainable form of transport, officers are recommended refusal of this application on the basis of its location in regard to sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no public speakers on this particular agenda item, but I gather that there's a statement to be read out.
Yeah, the agent and applicant are both on holiday, but I've been asked to read representation from the applicant, which I can do so now. So this is from Steve Glanzel, who is the applicant. The officer has acknowledged that the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply and that there should be a presumption in favour of sustainable development. Despite this acknowledgement, the reason given for refusal is that the site does not offer reasonable access to services and facilities and would otherwise rely on the use of private transport. The key point we would like to make is that sustainability measures should not be applied to this application, but even if they were, we have better access to services than other approved applications. The local plan defines rural settlements. Paragraph 5.11 indicates proposals should only be permitted that have access to 2 or more key services listed in paragraph 5.41. Although the issue of sustainability shouldn't be considered, we would like to address the perceived lack of access to services and draw attention to comparative planning applications that have been approved all within 800 metre of hours, despite having equal or less access to those services. We are the closest to 3 of the 8 services listed in 5.41. These are a health centre, children's play area and a primary school. We are second closest to the Haymaker pub, which is only a pleasant 10-minute walk away. The 3 approved applications are 1 in Cutterford's Door, which allowed for the occupation of a previously occupied annex. This application site is within 25 metres of our application and was approved accepting that it created a separate dwelling house that can be independently occupied. For the purposes of sustainability and private transport, this is a new dwelling. Approval makes no mention of sustainability or access to services despite having the exact same access as ours. Number 2 is Nimmer, the erection of a single dwelling. Permission was granted in July 2020, stating it would contribute to the housing provision. Our application would make a similar contribution to the housing provision. Approval makes no mention of sustainability or access to services, despite it having less access than our application. Number 3 is Chardley Green, the erection of 2 dwellings. Approved, stating the proposed site is in a sustainable location on a bus route which represents an acceptable scheme in accordance with ST1 and SS2. Our proposal has access to the same bus route with its closest stop.
Can you start bringing your presentation to a conclusion, because I think you've had 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So that's, and his conclusion is that the Chard Garden Centre is in the hamlet, as well as plants and garden supplies, provides other items. There are residential buildings on 3 sides. This is clearly infill. And the other 2 points make are about the levels, the Somerset Levels SPA catchment and a triple SI impact zone.
Thank you. Members, do you have any technical questions for the officer? Councillor Whale.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we, with the map is there now, could you point out the site which has been approved for 260 odd houses, which is surrounding Cutterford's Door, please?
Is that the area you're referring to?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
okay.
it. Yeah. And in that, what is the difference between the sustainability of that site and the sustainability of Cutterford's Door site?
Chairman, the issue here is this application was resolved to be approved by South Somerset, but no decision has been issued. The reason for that being that the Section 106 negotiations overran the introduction of the phosphate mitigation requirement, and to date the applicant has not been able to present a phosphate mitigation solution. So there is a reality that this application will have to come back to a committee of this council to be redetermined in light of the time that has elapsed since South Somerset resolved to approve it, and Somerset Council have to make a decision on it, or a final decision on it.
Well, but is it not a fact that the Regulation Committee of South Somerset Council approved the sustainability of that site as being within the area which services could be obtained for that site?
South Somerset Council resolved to approve, so is minded to approve that scheme, but as I've said, no decision has been issued, and therefore there is always the opportunity for an alternative decision to be made, even if that may seem perverse to this committee. So our concern is that we're relying upon an intervening development which has a resolution to approve but does not actually have an approval, and that's the issue in this case.
Councillor Hobhouse.
John, have they come up with a mitigation that meets the phosphate calculator for this site yet or not?
No solution has been presented. We've had discussions with the applicants about approaches that they could use. Obviously, there are issues with this and other sites which South Somerset would have been minded to approve, where things like ecology surveys, transport surveys were considered by South Somerset in 2018, 2019, 2020, and they may be out of date, which is why we have to give you a precautionary note that this committee will be asked to look at all of those decisions, all of those applications again, and whilst we would hope that Wednesbury reasonableness would indicate we continue with them, we cannot write off the opportunity or the, the scope that decisions could be reversed.
Are you, right, I need how to frame this. Are you minded to ask us to refuse this application on the grounds they haven't got mitigation at this point in time, or are you minded to ask us to approve it so that it can go forward to Natural England and then be approved that way?
I think the issue here is the scheme in the middle, the one that's on this plan, that's the scheme which South Somerset resolved to approve, but is still awaiting a solution to phosphates. The Cuttiford Dawes application, which my colleague has just presented, does have a phosphate solution, but in terms of its relationship to the established town edge, there is this gap, which is the land covered by a site where your former body resolved to approve something, but there is no actual decision notice that we can rely on to say it will happen and it will make a start. That's the issue. There is this uncertainty that until the scheme in the middle has actually got an approval, are we dealing with an isolated site or a site that you are committed to linking into the town when you redetermine Mount Hindrance?
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. Just reading the report, and it comes out on the system I'm using as page 8 of 9. Yes, page 8 of 9. And it's the paragraph before the conclusion, and this is talking about Somerset Levels Mills SPA, and the final three paragraphs are the site is located blah blah and therefore needs assessment for phosphate mitigation. The applicant has submitted a phosphate mitigation strategy comprising a nutrient mitigation strategy, nutrient neutrality and a shadow habitats regulation assessment to demonstrate that the proposed development will be phosphate neutral. A shadow habitats regulation assessment has been submitted and reviewed by Somerset Ecology Services and Natural England. Both have endorsed the documents as it demonstrates a phosphate neutrality through the proposed mitigation, whatever that is. So what is the problem with phosphates? And if there was such a problem, what is this application doing here? Should it not have been brought here when that has been solved one way or the other?
Can you clear up that confusion?
It may be easy if I actually point at the screen. Do you want to? This development does not have a phosphate mitigation solution. This is Mount Hindrance, Cuttiford Dawes up there, which is my colleague's application, does. So in itself, if this application had been approved, that wouldn't be a problem. This does not have a phosphate solution. It's the gap between this and the scheme we're looking at tonight.
In respect to the application site and the phosphate mitigation, it's in the Somerset Levels catchment area where there is an issue with excess phosphates going into the levels. So what happens, every new dwelling that has, or any development that has overnight accommodation proposed, must demonstrate phosphate neutrality. Now, phosphate neutrality has been, a solution has been found through through a packaged treatment plant, which will not leak, if you like, phosphates into the Somerset levels. So therefore, this application has come forward with a solution, and therefore has been approved by the Somerset Ecology Services and Natural England as is required. So this development will be phosphate neutral and not be an issue on Somerset levels.
So therefore, there is no grounds whatsoever for
Okay,
reducing this
we're not
application.
debating this point, Councillor Osborne. And I think the point was that we're talking about the Cutters of Door application, not the Mount Hindrance application. I have a question, which is, could you please just outline in policy the basis upon which dependence on the car is uniquely a criteria?
Well, because we don't have a 5-year land supply, the MPPF paragraph 11 would expect you to make a decision using tilted balance. One of those criteria that we look at is the sustainability of the site and whether or not, as I suggested, was the safe and convenient access to facilities and services. Now, there is a garden centre there, however, that's not considered to offer the range of facilities that would be needed. So therefore, it's a case of, well, where are the closest facilities and services? And they would be located in the centre of Chard. And what we need to look at is the safe and convenient access to there. So this is very much guided by the MPPF. And we've looked at this and we've seen that access to those sites at the moment would be either on unlit roads or unlit, unsurfaced public rights of way. And given the distance, we have to take a view as to whether or not we consider that to be likely that people will use, access those on foot, or whether they would use the motor car. And on this, looking at this on balance, it's a case of, well, we would say that this is probably more going to be car reliant, and therefore, when considering sustainability, that wouldn't be acceptable.
If I could just follow up before bringing in Councillor Well, who's got another question. Would you consider that a car was safe and convenient mode of access for a site, given that we have moved away from, in policy terms, from a totally anti-car position to a transport position? And these days we have electric cars which weren't around when the policy was written.
I'm really sorry, I missed the first bit of your question.
Would you
Sorry.
consider a car to be safe and convenient transport?
A car
A private car?
to be convenient and safe transport? Well, yes, it's convenient and it's safe, but we would be seeking to reduce the reliance on the private motor car and to encourage walking and those modes of transport. And what we need to then look at is whether or not, what's the access like from this site to those facilities and services. And so whilst a car might be safe and convenient, it's not in, when considering MPPF, we wouldn't say that we would be seeking a development that would be reliant on the motor car to access those facilities.
Can you tell me where in the MPPF it mentions cars?
We've got paragraph 79 and paragraph 80.
Thank you.
I think it's clear that when we have, we've had decisions in the past, certainly from inspectors as well, the reference to the private motor vehicle is very prevalent all the time in terms of considering sustainability.
I understand your point. I was just trying to establish that this comes from the NPPF. Councillor Whale.
Is it right that on that plan in front of you there, the crossroads on the left is on a bus route?
This
There.
there?
Yes.
As far as I'm aware, yes, that's the bus route.
And are you aware that on the right-hand corner, just below the main road going through, there is a school?
Yes. Down this part here, isn't it?
And just below the edge of the map, there is also the Holyrood Secondary School.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say they were not within sustainable distance of the property we are discussing in Cutter's Door?
What I would say is that it's not in, get my wording here, safe and convenient access. So at the moment, those public rights of way down into this site. So say you cross the road here
Yep.
and walk down.
Yep.
Well, that is, I've got a photograph of that. I would not suggest is a convenient access down, especially if it's at night, if it's unlit as well and wet. So you would be, if you wanted to walk on a surface, then you would be on the public highway, which is no pavements and also unlit. So we would say that that's not a safe, at the moment, a safe or convenient access into those services you mentioned.
Sorry, if I can, Chairman, are you aware that access, a part of it, if not all of it, is on the safer route for school for children from Coombs to Nicholas Village, which is 2.5 miles away, which is just inside the area where you have to be able to walk to the school. This is part of Cutter's Door, part of the roads you're talking about. And part of these public footpaths are part of the Somerset safer route to school. To say they're not safe for this application, I find very strange, but I say no more, Chair.
Are there any more technical questions? If not, I suggest that we move on to the debate about the application. Who wants to start? Councillor Well.
Member, do you want me to start off proceedings, Chairman? As far as I can see, there are two main reasons that the ward members and the parish council disagree with the planning officer's report and are recommending this application should be allowed. Firstly, sustainability. You've seen from the report about this outline application we've been discussing for 295 houses, football pitches and a neighbourhood hub. This was granted by South Somerset District Council Regulation Committee in 2019, I think. Sorry, is that my phone? in the middle of, I apologise, Chairman. Sorry about that. Yeah. If you look at the map on page 12 of the agenda, the southern part of Cutter's Door will be surrounded by this housing. The northern edge of the that site will be in the gardens of the 140 plus Barratt Home site, which is as you come out towards Cutter's Door on the same area. This means that the urban chard will be up to and including this previous settlement of Cutter's Door. This outlined site was granted on the presumption that it was sustainable for all services required under the local plan. Cutter's Door is the same distance from these services, and even if you ignore the outline application, it has a bus service close by and senior and junior schools within walking range, and is close, if not closer, to all the services of Chard than the development now going on in the southeast development of Chard, the key site. SS1 states rural settlements will be part of the countryside. By allowing the outline planning application, Cutter's Door can no longer be considered a rural settlement and fall within SS1. However, if you do not accept that, then SS2 states if the application falls within SS1, it will only be permitted in rural settlements with 2 or more key services available. It's clear that there's 2 or more clear services available on this application. You will see from the applicant's report that similar garden developments have been allowed in Wadford, which is a further 800 metres further along and away from the bright lights of Chard, and they were considered sustainable. This application is with the grounds of Fry's Cottage, as you've heard, and both the local garden centre and a large, fairly new residential property are on its boundaries. There is no objection from neighbours, from the statutory consultees. We've heard that the phosphate problem has been addressed, and nor has the parish council objected. The applicant has produced a solution to the phosphates, as I've said, and also the ecological survey. The argument that this is unsustainable, is my view and the parish's views, cannot be supported. Secondly, we have the acknowledgement on page 15 that the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply. Therefore, the presumption is in favour of sustainable development set out in the NPPF. If you accept my arguments that either this application is removed from being a rural settlement by the granting of the outline planning permission, or if that is not agreed, then it has 2 or more of the named services which are named in SS2, it's therefore sustainable, and we must, as the NPPF states, presume in favour and allow this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who wants to speak? In which case, I would ask, I think the first matter is to vote on the officer's recommendation. So if I could propose the officer's recommendation from the chair, which is that this is refused on the grounds given in the report. Can I just have a show of hands of those who agree with the officer recommendation? Sorry, do I have a seconder for the purposes of administration? Okay, those in favour of the officer's recommendation. Okay, well, this is clearly not being going along with the officer's recommendation. Could I ask, before we consider the alternate, whether there are conditions that should be imposed if the committee is minded to give permission for this?
I have a list of conditions if you'd like me to go through them with you now.
If you could briefly go through them, yes.
Yeah, so we have first condition, 3 years as standard. The second condition will
Sorry,
be...
can you, this is the first time the committee's met, so can you just give the topic of the condition?
Yes, of course. So the first condition will be that the development must commence within 3 years of the date of the permission when it's issued, which is a standard condition. The second condition shall be carried out in accordance with the approved plans, and that will contain a list of the plans that have been submitted. The third condition is that the development approved will be constructed using materials that are set out in the application documents. Condition 4 states that the dwelling won't be occupied until the parking spaces are provided in a position approved by the local planning authority and thereafter retained. Condition 5 is prior to the construction of any part of the development above the damp-proof course, we are asking for the number and location of charging points for plug-in and other ultra-low emission vehicles. Condition 6 would be prior to the commencement of the development or demolition of existing structures, that a scheme of tree and hedgerow protection is submitted and once approved to be followed. In condition 7 relates to the package treatment plant, with written evidence being required that the acquisition and the installation of the package treatment plant has been undertaken, and that number 9 is that the development be carried out in strict accordance with a mitigation scheme that was submitted, with a preliminary ecological appraisal that was submitted. And that will be the list of the conditions.
Thank you very much. Can I ask, first of all, are members content with those, to accept those conditions? Are there any further conditions that members feel we should debate? in which case I'll propose from the chair that we permit this application subject to the Commission, subject to the conditions which have...
Chair, I might be jumping in before you say something. We would usually, from the proposer, would make a summary of the reasons for the approval. Often it's a reversal of the refusal. And then I just wanted to ask, is this the phosphate mitigation was mentioned, so do we need subject to a section 106 to cover that mitigation? No, it's going to be outside of, that's fine. Yep.
Okay, so I'm presuming that the actual drafting of the reason for the decision notice would be down to delegated to officers, but in summary, it's that the committee considers that this is a sufficiently sustainable location to allow development, given its immediate proximity to the facilities called for in SS2. In which case I will move that recommendation from the chair, and Councillor Hobhouse is seconding. Can I see all of those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. The next agenda item is agenda item number 6, which is land north of Broadway Hill, Horton, Ilminster. I see we have both ward members present, so they will get their chance to speak at the appropriate time. I'm struggling to see the sorry, is it John? Is it you that's taking this? It's Catherine Tyrer, isn't it? I do apologise.
Chairman, this is one that I'm presenting because Catherine has 3 on the agenda, and for reasons of voice and capacity, I'm dealing with this one. So this is a full planning application for 49 dwellings at Broadway Hill in Horton. The application site is marked in red on the attached plan. So it sits between 3 roads, formerly the A303, which runs down to the hall in Horton. It takes its main access onto Broadway Hill with a subservient single dwelling access coming out onto Pound Lane. The application site is, in some ways, could be seen as a rounding off of Horton. If you look at Horton, it started off as very much of a linear village, and then in between these roads has seen development coming in behind frontages, and this seeks to pursue that character issue. In terms of the aerial photograph, again, you can see the same. This is a field which comes into the village but is bounded to north and south by patterns of development or lines of development upon the adjoining roads. A series of photographs of the site before we get into the plans. So initially this is from Broadway Hill, looking at the site, and Naroche, which is the closest dwelling to the site from, as I said, from Broadway Hill. And you can see that currently there are views across the site towards the Blackdown Hills. We've got the views of the sight lines which run north and south, which run east and west. So this is east looking back into the village, and west looking down towards the village hall. And going further down towards the village hall, it's located here, which is just to the south of the field in which the application is proposed. And you can see that there are some dwellings which are reasonably close, and this is something that's been raised in public commentary about a relationship to the village hall. Coming back and looking along Pound Lane, there is a single point of access into the site to deliver or to service one dwelling, and you can see it here. And again, this is Naroche, which we showed you on the first set of photographs. Again, if you go in through the entrance from Pound Lane, this is the view across the site. So it slopes away, and this view is extending south-southwest, slopes away into open countryside. And again, you see the properties along here, so you've got back gardens to a number of properties which back onto the site itself. And again, we've got adjoining properties which butt up immediately to the site. In relation to Naroche, you see here a balcony area or raised seating area that's been constructed to the side of the property, and that looks towards the application site. Looking in again, we have a common boundary with a rear garden which would adjoin the access for a single dwelling. And we start to run round through the properties which again back onto the site and have a mixture of boundary treatments, so an open environment there. Some tree screening within existing curtilages, providing some buffering. And again, you sort of see as you move down the site, the house is slightly set back from the common boundary. So the application site, I said we've seen the boundary, so here's the single plot which accesses Pound Lane. There is a court environment that's created at this point, which is predominantly the affordable housing. And you can see that in relation to Naroche, there's a terrace which adjoins Naroche, so we have in terms of infill, we have the sort of relationship of properties presenting gables to common boundaries, but obviously it does have a relationship to the raised balcony area created here, albeit, of course, there are no rights to views. We have, again, a further gable along here, which has raised concerns in terms of the relationship to existing bungalows, albeit it tends to split the common boundary, and you can see in relation to these properties, the existing trees provide some screening. The scheme provides a mix of houses which generally meets the housing needs requirement and tends towards chalet bungalow development in this part of the site, which picks up on the bungalows that tend to run around Pound Road and Forest Mill Lane. Where the scheme drops away in levels, it introduces two-storey properties. However, this again comes where ground has fallen quite considerably, so the overall impact is managed in landscape terms, with this being the highest part of the site. The affordable housing is split and has been moved to avoid it becoming a single enclave, so we have affordable housing in this location and also over here, which provides a mix of first homes and social rent. The scheme is in that respect policy compliant. Some of the house types. This is again one of the properties that's used near the site entrance. It's used in this plot here and this plot here. So you have a single-storey building with roof space accommodation rather than a 1.5-storey property in design terms. Moving on, a similar approach has been taken again in that corner of the site that picks up the bungalows, the existing bungalows, and again it includes dormers and roof lights, but is very much of a single-storey form. The terrace of housing that fronts the site and adjoins Naroche is depicted here. You can see it has blank gables and adopts a traditional design. And that similarly runs through the site with a mix of natural stone, good quality materials, and a mix of 2, 3 and 4 bed houses throughout the remainder. There are some visuals, but I don't want to dwell on these because they're an artist impression rather than the plan. They show that the site does have a green space towards its entrance. This is the area of where the affordable housing, or mix of affordable housing is and was. So if I run back to the plan, you've got this sort of more terraced vernacular solution here and more modern and chalet designs around here. So there's a sort of a reflection of the character of the area. Now, in terms of late correspondence, so documents that were submitted after the report was drafted, we received a speed survey which indicated the need for additional visibility displays. This was prepared by the parish. The commentary resulted in a revised plan showing additional sightlines which have been submitted and accepted by Highways. The travel plan coordinator at the County Highways, or the Unitary Highways team, has provided further clarification on what they require in terms of travel plans. There was a query raised about whether there was a need for funding for NHS services. And that particularly picked up on the closure of a facility, I think, in Chard. The NHS have confirmed that they are not requiring any capital funding. There is an issue, I think, in terms of health infrastructure generally, in that whereas we normally ask for the Education Authority or money to support the Education Authority, when it comes to health, I think there's a general reflection of the quality of service people receive, whereas from the Planning Authority's perspective, the issue is to provide funding for capital works. We can't guarantee that service provision will meet expectations. We had further correspondence, again, relating to the amenity of Naroche and picking up on the balcony, the raised seating area over the flat-roofed extension, and again, an additional comment about the lack of community facilities within Broadway itself. So, moving to the key considerations, as the report sets out, Horton is clearly a SS2 village. It has 5 of the facilities that we would expect to see to support additional development. We've touched on, and we will finish this presentation looking at the housing supply issue, but there is an expectation in policy SS2 that there is the capacity for development to come forward. This site is well related to the village. It's actually quite walkable to the facilities that the village has. Some are on the immediate doorstep. There is a footway along Broadway Hill, albeit it crosses the road as it comes closer into the village. In terms of local character and landscape impact, this is an infill scheme. It will have a landscape impact. That's obvious because all development will have an immediate local change in landscape character, but that's a factor of development. It's not necessarily a criticism of this scheme. And in terms of the growth of the village and the way it's expanded, we believe this sits as an infill effectively between 2 roads which have taken development or extended development away from the heart of Horton. So we don't believe that there is a landscape impact that is a material factor. In terms of amenity on adjoining properties, we've shown you the closest boundaries. However, there is a fair degree of separation in terms of a lack of overlooking of windows. And again, within, or when we are looking at new development, we will see gables coming up to common boundaries. So the properties themselves, or the proposal, the question is it overbearing or is it a change in character, given that, as I said, we have no rights to views. There's been a number of comments about highway road capacity, parking. There are no objections from the Highways Authority, and indeed their commentary is focused more upon travel planning within the site. So there are no highway grounds for refusal, and again we need to remember that the NPPF sets a test of severe impact, not just change. So scale and access to services. There are 5 of the 8 services that we normally seek within Horton. What we don't have access to is primary schools or direct access to health facilities or larger scale retail, but we do have the named facilities that exist or that are set out in policy SS2. And as I've noted, the bulk of them are actually relatively walkable. Those within Horton are relatively walkable from the site itself. The phosphate mitigation solution that's been put forward suggests a short-term buffer solution that's required until the local water treatment plant is upgraded. Effectively, that is a requirement until the end of 2024. A number of applicants are actually dealing with that by committing to not occupying any properties until the water treatment plant has been upgraded to remove the need for interim buffering or fallow land requirements. The long-term requirement is delivered by a woodland which is in land owned by the applicant in the same river catchment and has been the subject of consultation with Natural England and Somerset Ecology. So there is a phosphate mitigation solution that can render this scheme nutrient neutral. In terms of housing supply, obviously the decision that you're making is based on the fact that since phosphates became an issue for South Somerset, our housing supply position has gone from 6 years, which put us in a positive position, to, as of this year, having 3.7 years worth of housing supply. So we've seen a constant decline in housing delivery. The trend is unlikely to improve for the next monitoring year because we know that we have not been able to issue decisions. We haven't been in front of South Somerset's various planning committees with significant numbers of housing schemes, so that remains a problem. And that introduces the tilted balance. Now, the tilted balance means that you don't throw away the local plan policies. You consider the scheme against policy SS1 and SS2. But it does mean that those policies which seek to restrict housing development are considered to be out of date, such that you need to show that the harms to development significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Now, one of the issues you have to look at when looking at schemes such as this is that the delivery of housing per se is seen as a benefit, and the delivery of affordable housing will be given significant weight. It is given significant weight, whether it's by, or should be by the local authority or at appeal. So delivering housing and delivering affordable housing are positive elements. You may determine that there are elements of the scheme that run counter to policies within the local plan, but the tilted balance means that you need to find harms that are significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits of delivering housing supply. So the recommendation has been that we approve the scheme subject to a Section 106 to secure the phosphate solution, to secure on-site affordable housing, and to secure the open space and education mitigation or funding, and subject to conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have 5 objectors who've registered to speak with us on this, and we will be restricting the time in accordance with the Constitution. So the first is Robert Hutchinson. Do we have a... We're using...
Good evening, Robert Hutchinson, Fairfield Farm, Broadway Hill. With data recently received from the installed speed indicator device on Broadway Hill, shown in one of the photographs by the officer, I would like to draw the committee's attention to potential safety hazards. The SID is recording about 850 daily vehicle movements in and out of the village. Of those coming in, 18% would get a statutory fixed penalty notice for speeding, and on those leaving, 34% would be in the same category. a vehicle leaving was recorded at 71 miles per hour at the entrance to the village hall. With the expected vehicles with the proposal being in excess of 120, this will increase the usage of Broadway Hill by at least 50%. The SID figures are in line with the Parish Council's independent traffic consultant's results. Broadway Hill is a designated emergency relief road for emergency vehicles of the 303. The Council's traffic officer has just had the double white lines on Broadway Hill repainted. No overtaking for safety reasons. Pedestrians, as pointed out, wishing to gain access to the village must use the pavement along the north side of the road, then cross to the south side approximately halfway to the Five Dials junction, and then cross back to get at that junction to get into the village. The two roads opposite them, the first Pound Lane, is a very popular back road to Taunton, and at peak times is extremely busy. There is also on-street parking on the right-hand side of this road. Personally, I am always extremely careful turning left into the Pound from Broadway Hill, as oncoming vehicles are in the middle of the road. There is no pavement or street lighting the entire length of the Pound in Horton. The second road, Goose Lane, accesses village amenities and Broadway and has no footpath on the left-hand side till the post office shop is
20
reached.
seconds.
Again, with no on-street parking. Pedestrians have to move into the road to get past these cars. I will also remind the committee that the original proposal, a pedestrian access, was planned through the field gateway into the Pound. This was amended after objection from Avon and Somerset Constabulary on safety grounds.
Thank you very much, Mr Hutchinson. That's 3 minutes. The second speaker I have is Jane Wetherill.
Yeah, thank you. If you could give me that warning as well, it would be greatly appreciated. So I'm here to present concerns and the impact it will have on local education, health and service for children. These systems in this area are already really fragile. My own experience in the village is wonderful, but is not without challenge due to the isolated amenities and our transport. This includes accessing GP, dentist, specialist child services and education. It's due to these challenges I have concern to the impact on education and the services of children that these additional dwellings will bring following years of cutbacks and services already being stretched. I raise these concerns under S6, infrastructure EQ7, TA1 and S106. I note that late in the letter S106 there are no objections from education and would like to understand the date this was requested from county, as I am aware there are significant changes and increases to the catchments of the schools concerned. I also challenge the numbers of predicted additional challenge from the 50 dwellings as suggested in the report, as we are aware Horton will be attractive to more families given the recent good and outstanding Ofsted of the local schools. As someone who's worked in education for 38 years, I have seen the current infrastructure and small communities like Horton collapse under the strain of additional housing and limited subsequent resources. These are areas that are breaking the system due to the additional support of funding needed for families. Early years and playgroups, there is only one main one in Broadway that is oversubscribed. There are private nurseries within 2 miles walking distance with no pavements and have waiting lists. Recruiting staff to these venues, should pupils' numbers increase, is impossible in today's employment market and will need additional people travelling to the village for work as well as parking. Registered childminders, there aren't any in our area. They are under much pressure and impossible to find. This means parents wishing to work will need to travel outside the area, increasing traffic and limiting social mobility. Primary schools. Horton does not have a school. The village school next door is an outstanding school and popular for families from locally and from far. It is currently oversubscribed and at pan. at PAN means that you cannot legally go over those class numbers, which means family will need to seek schools outside the area. It is interesting that this is not mentioned in the report. The school site has very little space to develop, and extending buildings will be a challenge to meet pupil space. Secondary school, Holyrood is excellent, but there are many children being refused places as the year groups. The projected numbers, once Holyrood can accept them all, will mean additional buses coming into the school. The current bus stops struggle with a number of pupils waiting to be dropped off and blocked cars currently trying to travel. It also coincides with the primary school causing backlogs.
That's your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The third speaker I have is Anne Winter.
Good evening.
First of all, I'm a resident in Horton. Horton is a rural settlement, and the proposed development on Broadway Hill clearly is an urban model and totally inappropriate for Horton for many reasons, some of which I will mention now. We understand Horton must grow, but we feel strongly that one site of 49 houses does not suit our village. Over the last 3 years, Horton Parish Council has supported building plans for 49 houses spread throughout the village. Our concerns include the fact that we have limited amenities for our community. For example, Naroche Primary School is full, Broadway's doctor surgery is full, and we have no bus service in the village. Horton Village Hall was built on its current site to ensure it would not impact negatively on local residents. Yet Galleon want to build 49 houses directly next door to Horton Village Hall. The hall opened in 2009, and it hosts a number of weddings, parties, conferences, concerts, band rehearsals, and a range of daily classes. Many of these do not finish until midnight. To give you an understanding of how busy Horton Village Hall is, it has no free Saturday until the 23rd of December 2003. In the summer, a number of outdoor events take place, which could impact negatively on house owners in the proposed development and create conflict with new residents. Page 20 of the case officer's report infers double glazing on the houses will minimise noise pollution for residents, ignoring the fact that Horton Village Hall has outdoor events and windows will be opened in the summer. I hope you can all understand how Horton residents feel about the scale of this development, which is totally out of character, as demonstrated by the 100 who registered comments against this application. I ask the application is refused.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time so well. The fourth speaker I've got listed is Emma Preece.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Emma Preece, and I'm the owner-occupier of the property called Naroche, which you've seen on the pictures today. And I'd like to draw your attention to pages 19 and 20 of the officer's report, where she makes comments on our loss of outlook. She suggests that they're not unacceptable, given that the development will be reviewed through a secondary window on a side elevation. As you can see by the pictures here, that secondary window is nothing of the sort. It is, in fact, a double-width balcony with French doors leading out. It's 16 metres square and has a panoramic outlook over the whole of the proposed development. And as I know you will accept that it is a valid planning application. We have asked that the officer update her report with accurate a reflection of our property's design, and also that she re-evaluate her comments on loss of outlook based on this new information. To date, we have yet not had an acknowledgement of that request, nor has it been actioned. To ignore such a request and move forward with a planning process based on such untruths in this report suggests to me a clear and predetermined bias towards the applicant. As I'm sure you're aware, that any planning application that is passed where the supporting documentation contains known inaccuracies is likely to be viewed as both unacceptable and unlawful in a High Court. On that basis, I would like to read a comment from a case that went to judicial review on this very basis very recently. The judge commented, "Knowingly omitting key information on a planning report and or acting with bias and predetermination will almost always certainly see the application quashed in a higher court, whilst leaving people or persons involved open to other legal and professional challenges. It is vital that the public have full trust in the council and the processes by which these kind of decisions are made. And it is also important that those processes are executed in a legitimate and transparent fashion. I do not believe this is the case here this evening. With over 104 objections to this development and 0 support, this development is both unwelcome and, more importantly, unwarranted in the community. And we stand with the community.
Thank you very much. That's your 3 minutes up. I now have a speaker who wants to support the application, Angus MacDonald. Oh, beg your pardon, I'm one ahead of myself. I've got Kathleen Lovely, who's an objector.
Oh yes, hello, my name is Kathleen Lovely. I can't really add very much to what's already been said, but what I would like to say is that
Thank you for your contribution, and apologies for the false start. I now have Angus MacDonald, who wants to speak in favour of the application.
Chair, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I am the founder of the business in question, and our focus is to build traditional family homes that bring all the efficiencies of a new home whilst fitting into the local vernacular. Having recently been certified as a member of B Corp, we aim to be a force for good and achieve their high standards of social and environmental performance. Following the submission of the application in 2020, Natural England introduced the phosphates embargo. After nearly 3 years of being unable to progress any projects, we are pleased to have evolved an excellent nature-based mitigation strategy to offset the phosphate levels. This is supported by Natural England and your colleagues at Somerset Ecology, which has allowed this application to come to you for determination this evening. The site was chosen because it had been proposed by the council for residential development beforehand. It was not intensely farmed and it sat naturally within the built envelope of Horton. Whilst we recognise the shortfall in the housing targets, this generally appeared to be a natural site on which to create much needed attractive housing. We engaged Wienerberger, who are equally environmentally driven, to submit the application and work closely with all stakeholders. We sought to minimise the impact on existing properties and the village, but at the same time wanted to provide first-time buyer homes, affordable homes, and a good mix of family homes. As well as addressing the local concerns where possible, we have complied with the myriad of planning policies such that the planning officers have now been able to recommend this for approval. If approved, we will seek to minimise the impact during the construction phase and work with local residents to avoid disruption to their day-to-day living. We will be embracing fast methods of construction which both improve the energy rating of the homes and reduce our time on site. The conditions and terms of the Section 106 agreement have been agreed, along with the timing of substantial contributions towards education, the open space projects and affordable housing. We are a local company that has an affinity to the area. It's in our interest to be using locally sourced materials, local labour, and to be accountable. Once completed, our goal is for the scheme to complement the village, and to that end we go to a lot of trouble to build bespoke properties that reflect the surroundings. We respect the objections set out in the Planning Officer's report, but believe that by delivering the scheme as proposed, we will demonstrate that the cause for concern for many of these will be resolved.
20 seconds.
We specifically chose to make this a full application as opposed to an outline, so that the community will understand what we will actually build. After all these years of hard work and refinement, we'd be most grateful if you would support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time so precisely. I now have two parish council representatives on my speaking list. Ray Buckler, Chairman of Horton Parish Council. Put your microphone on, please.
Good evening. Just an outline, Broadway Hill and Hanning Road comprise the old 303 from Southfield Roundabout, which rejoins the 303 towards Honiton. Horton Parish Council have been engaged in a project to set up speed indicators at this location to address existing speeding problems since before 2020, which were held up by COVID. There has been a considerable increase in traffic which occurs on this road at regular times on many days during the tourist season. Whenever Southfield's roundabout is blocked, drivers unfamiliar with this side road and just leaving a 60-mile-an-hour A303 will be adding considerably to the volume of traffic going past this proposed development. As noted in the Planning Officer's report and the planning data that we've done, I must disagree with the planning assertion on page 5, which states, and I quote, "During the site visit, passing traffic was observed and noted that the traffic volumes were light and that speeds generally appear to be accorded with the speed limit. Since the application was submitted, no recollection of concerns being raised directly with the Highways Authority about traffic speeds," end quote. As a resident of Horton, I can confirm and have observed on regular occasions the speed of traffic well above 40 miles an hour, at times with the road is used as a back route to Taunton, as mentioned before. The field of development is constrained, as shown by the diagram, to one narrow part of Broadway Hill to be accessible for road access. I therefore challenge the key assumptions of the planning report on speed and safety as follows. The only pedestrian route to and from the development requires crossing Broadway Hill, as mentioned before. The confirmed high speeds at the location of the crossing will make this unsafe, and the development encourages greater use of this crossing without any regard for the safety of pedestrians. There is also a double white line, as shown on the screen, at this point to prohibit overtaking. This would indicate there is already a safety issue. I also understand that no traffic calming can be placed on this road. It is still the only relief road to the A303 when Southfields is blocked. This is not to mention the planning report. This is not mentioned at all in the planning report. I understand that paragraph 111 of the National Policy Planning Framework says development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. In the view of the Parish Council, this situation exists or will exist. Due to the size of the development, I disagree with the officer comment on page 5. It is not always the case that speeding survey is required for all applications. For reasons stated above, a proper speed survey should have been taken in place, so we oppose the application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buckler. The Chairman of Neighbouring Broadway Parish Council, Peter Gregory.
Thank you, Chairman. Broadway adjoins and shares some facilities with Horton. For that reason, Broadway Parish Council has objected to this development on 2 occasions. Its objections are set out in the officer's report, and all of them are still relevant. Of these objections, I wish to draw attention to 2 related issues. First, the need for open market and affordable housing. No case is made by the developer that either form of dwelling is needed locally. Reliance is placed solely on the district-wide need for housing. That is not surprising. Not only has there been a measure of organic growth in Horton sufficient to meet local need, but the 80% growth of nearby Broadway since 1991 has provided a more than sufficient supply of both types of housing for the needs of both villages. Nor has the developer taken account of the fact that Broadway has consents for 60 houses, with both sites being within a short walking distance of the application site. It is the case that any housing need in both villages, taken together, would be more than catered for by the houses which are approved to be built in Broadway. This new development can therefore only house newcomers with social and economic links elsewhere. Secondly, sustainability. SSDC's local plan policy SS2 posits that restricted development can be appropriate in rural settlements like Horton, where there are social and economic facilities. The officer's report repeats this assertion. Developers then use this argument that their development sustains such institutions and is in turn sustained by them to justify their project. In both villages, the number of social and economic facilities available has gone down while the villages have grown. The reason for this is that both villages have become dormitories for residents who shop, send their secondary-age children to school, attend for secondary medical care, seek their entertainment, and travel to work in the wider area, and not where they live. Developing rural settlements like Horton, as proposed, means therefore more travel, not less, and so more cars on the road and more CO2. That outcome is flatly against paragraphs 108 and 143 of the NPPF, and against local authorities' efforts to deal with the climate emergency. Taken together, the fact that housing need can be catered for by approved housing developments in nearby Broadway, and the decline of local social and economic facilities in either village will further entrench the role of both villages as dormitories rather than self-sustaining communities. The opposite of what should be happening.
Bring your speech to a close, please. Thank you very much. I now have Mr. Telford, who is the agent for the applicant.
Thank you. My name is Eric Telford. I'm the agent acting on behalf of the applicant, and I submitted the application and have dealt with it with the officers throughout its progress. The site wasn't chosen at random by Galleon. It was in fact a site that was identified for housing by the council itself, and it was programmed for the 2025-2030 programme in the South Somerset Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment. So in fact it wasn't a site that was chosen at random, it was one that the council had already allocated. The site has been brought forward because of the shortfall in the current 5-year housing land supply, which certainly stands at 3.7 years, and in fact will get worse because of the restrictions on the issuing of new planning permissions because of the mitigation requirements. The shortfalls resulted in planning appeals for larger housing schemes than the district being allowed, with planning inspectors referring to the housing shortfall as the principal reason for those decisions. The current proposal is one of the few that will come before you that can be determined, that meets in fact your office's recommendation and all the statutory consultees. We recognise that there's public opposition to the proposals. I attended a parish council meeting and put the case for the applicant at the time. Some objections relate to the scheme in its entirety, some suggest a reduced number, but objections must be considered on planning issues alone and in the context of the local and national development plan policies. The site is well contained within the substantial hedgerows around the site, and of the 49 dwellings now proposed, 35% or 17 dwellings are affordable housing. The number of dwellings at a density of 21.5 per hectare makes the best use of the land, although that is even below the suggested level of 30 dwellings per hectare put forward in the National Planning Policy Framework. The Highway Authority have agreed the scheme with respect to the access of Broadway Hill. In terms of infrastructure, the Education Authority have agreed the scheme, subject to a contribution of £174,000. The NHS have written back and agreed that local services are capable of accommodating the development. Local open space projects will be supported by a contribution of £103,000.
20 seconds.
All I want to say, sir, is as the proposal represents a sustainable form of development in a sustainable location, and there is such a significant shortfall in the 5-year housing land supply, as explained in the officer's report, there is a presumption in favour of the development and that such application should be approved without delay. Could I possibly just comment on 2 points that were made?
I think we'll leave comments to the officers
Okay,
if possible. Thank you. And finally on my list, I've got local ward member Val Keach. Councillor Keach.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to take up the full 3 minutes. I'm going to ask the committee to turn this proposal down. It's totally out of character for where it is. I am the representative from Ilminster Town Council at the local primary school. They are bursting at the seams. Part of that is because a few years ago, the then County Council extended the catchment area for Near Roche to include part of Ilminster. So 60 children from Ilminster go to Near Roche. They have no space. Holyrood is bursting at the seams. The transport problems are enormous. I'm one of those people who use the back road on a daily basis to go into Taunton, and so I apologise for that, but I do keep to the speed limits. It is a horrendous road, the traffic along there, if people are walking their dogs, children having to walk to school. Yes, there is a small convenience store there and a post office, but I think this is totally out of keeping with Horton and Broadway as a village. The health service, I don't think will be able to cope. The schools certainly can't cope. When I spoke to the head teacher, I think yesterday, they have two in-year places. Well, they won't take long to be filled up. So just on the education alone, the health services alone, the extra traffic that 49 dwellings, it's not like 50, 60 years ago when perhaps half the houses would have had a car. Now you're probably talking 2, if not 3 cars per household. So the extra traffic that this will generate, Horton cannot sustain this, and in my view, nor should it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being so brief. The next thing I'd like to do is ask the officers to respond to the comments made to date.
Thank you, Chairman. Just running through some of the bullet points that I've taken in terms of issues about speeding and breaching speed limits. It's practically impossible to determine planning applications based on people breaching legal requirements in terms of speed. There is a way of enforcing that, which isn't the planning system. Somebody talked about, well, a number of people talked about education and health infrastructure, and this is a constant source of frustration, I think, for planning authorities, because we don't manage those services. We consult with the key contacts with health and education services, and they give us their view as the expert party. And both, well, education have said we want money so that we can undertake works, and they take the responsibility for delivering a facility. I touched in the presentation on potentially the issue between education and health, in that a lot of the commentary we get about health is about the quality of the facility, where the planning authority is really just trying to provide square metres or funded square metres within which a health body can work. So the health authority said they don't need money, and if they had asked for money, we would have pursued that on their behalf. What we can't do is staff surgeries or deal with waiting lists. We can only really deliver square metres. So I understand the local resident frustrations with that, but the extent of our involvement is really to say, do you as the body need more space? Turning to the urban development issue, if I run back to the layout plan just briefly, clearly from a resident perspective the layout is more dense than that which surrounds it, but that is a function of the evolution of land and property development over this century, in that we are also tasked with making efficient use of sites. So in terms of the types of schemes that councillors who were formerly on South Somerset or other councils would have seen, this is a relatively low density scheme with a number of detached properties and some sizable gardens. Over your term of office you will see a number of more dense schemes. So yes, it isn't a perfect replica of what sits around it, but it is a low density scheme of its time. In relation to the commentary about Naroche, well, I think we've included in the late correspondence the submission, and we've run through a photograph of the site to show you the relationship between Naroche, which is here, and we've shown you the elevation to this property. That's located 2 metres from the common boundary. Running through, the parish council have talked about the planning officer's comments on page 5, which also I think translates into about page 26. Those are actually the Highway Authority comments. So, you know, the issue we've got, as South Somerset, we might have a view about the Highway Authority, but as Somerset Council, they are our colleagues, and they have said that they have no objections. The commentary from Broadway about the growth of Broadway, I think, is recognised. We know that both communities have taken a significant number of sites. Where else? The agents talked about the HELA being a way of allocating the site. The HELA doesn't allocate a site. There is no allocation for this site. The HELA is an in-house exercise in terms of identifying opportunity sites for the local plan. As members will know, South Somerset didn't progress its local plan review because it's becoming a unitary. So the HELA is effectively an evidence base which says that technically this site can be delivered. It isn't an allocation. Commentary about schools and being full, again, it's difficult for us to say if the county council, if our colleagues in education are going to say that they need money and they're not going to object, it's difficult for us to turn around and say we disbelieve you, and actually we will refuse on those counts. So, you know, I think the issue for members is the tilted balance between policy SS2, which links the number and range and type of facilities to the capacity for growth, and the tilted balance, which identifies the need for the harm to be significant and demonstrable. And if you believe that is the case, then policy SS2 is the issue to focus on in the debate. I think the infrastructure and some of the other points, they are going to be clearly frustrations or irritations or more for residents, but for us to go against colleague consultees is likely to be far more problematic. Thank you, Chair.
Members, before we move on to technical questions for the officers, are there any points of clarification from things raised by members of the public? Okay, technical questions? Councillor Potts-Jones.
Sorry, it's for the officer really. When you're saying here, here and here, I've got absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You might see an arrow on your screens, but we do not see it up on the board.
Are there any particular points you would like me to point out to you?
No, thanks.
Yeah.
And I think if you could actually point to the screen physically, that would remove the ambiguity.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, but when you were going through the presentation, I don't know whether you were meant to have a laser. I think some of us knew bits of the site, but not everybody did, and it didn't show up at all the bits you were talking about. So it might be helpful to point out where the bungalows are and where the detached properties are, because that does make a difference to roofscapes. And also if you could bring up, I think, there are also diagrams of the different cross-sections through the site, showing the different roof levels in relation to each other, both existing and proposed properties. Thanks.
The bungalow developments include this property here. These are two-storey. This is two-storey, but again, this run here, these are single-storey properties. This run here, this court, is the single-storey with roof accommodation. This, where you get lower down the site, is the two-storey properties. So you have a transition between single-storey with roof space accommodation, and two-storey. In terms of the cross-sections, again, these run through the site, so you've got two-storey as you drop down the site. That's along the road frontage, but this is probably the more useful one, which is showing that as you come across the site, you've got single-storey at the higher ground, and the two-storey tending to drop away. Now, because this is a 2D representation across the site, you will see some taller properties at the higher end of the site. Those are, if you like, these properties here, which adjoin, again, Naroche, which is two-storey, plus other two-storey property, which comes to this part of the site. So you've got this sort of a transition that they've used a queue for slightly taller properties here than in this area to deliver this approach. And as you say, or as I said, when it comes to here, you start to see the contour dropping away.
Do we have any other technical questions? Councillor Whale.
Just, could you do the, oh sorry, go back to that one, John, the plan. Can you point out the Naroche location for me again?
It's this property here. There are, I think we've had about 3 photographs of it. I'll just
Which one is it?
go through them.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
So, that one. This is Naroche. Now, obviously, the owners have talked about the view, but you'll be familiar with there is no right to a view. The right is to amenity, not to a view. But this is Naroche, and you'll see it again. It will back onto the site, so you've got the site wrapping round here.
But is not the building which the balcony is on part of the building?
It is. It's an extension to the original property.
Yeah, so well, what is the distance between that and what will be the back garden of whatever the houses are which are going to back onto it?
The actual distance to the back gardens is going to be probably in the order of 15 metres, because the back gardens, the houses themselves are sat back. So the houses front into the site with their back gardens here.
Yeah.
So you've got the dwelling, and then you've got an oblique view across towards the garden at the rear. I'll go back to the plan. I'll go forward to the plan.
I'll allow that question. Well, can you turn your microphone off, please?
Right, the pointer has gone, so I've got it on red, but there's no red. Oh, there it is. So we've got a photograph that looked across the site this way, a photograph that looked this way, and a photograph that looked this way into the site. We don't have a photograph that actually looks down there.
Okay, do members have any further technical questions? Labez.
Yeah, mine is a technical question. The thing now that I'm, with our movement towards electric cars, the provision of car charging points within houses. Obviously, it's very easy for a developer to say they'll put a charging point in each of the garages. The 16 amps that they've chosen is very low on that scale. The thing that I'm worried about, especially in village, is with this amount of chargers, is are we ensuring in that specification that the infrastructure back to the transformers and all the rest of it can cope with the power? And also another thing, with the development, I work in the battery industry, now with higher capacity batteries with cars, more and more chargers are swapping to three-phase, and houses are having to transfer to three-phase. Is that being considered of the capacity for this site and also the availability if houses have to be transferred to three-phase?
It's not something that we will take into account, because the electricity providers and the developers will have a separate arrangement between them. And for us to be, again, determining applications on our concerns about capacity, if they can't deliver the solution, then they can't start. So they need to agree with the electricity company that they can deliver the solution on site.
But is that recorded? Because I can remember an application in a village for 14. The people building the houses said actually that wasn't their problem. And when they looked into the substation couldn't deal with the chargers.
I take the point, but as I said, the applicant needs to enter into he needs to secure the travel plan, which will deliver the EV charging. It's not an issue where we will question or determine on the basis of will the electricity company provide. There is an obligation on the electricity company to provide solutions. We have got issues in Yeovil where we know developers can't make a start because they can't get access to sufficient power, and that could be the problem that somebody faces here, but it's not an issue for us to say we are going to refuse because we don't believe there's sufficient power within the area. We don't have a policy about that. It's something the developer has to deliver.
No, I don't, because I don't actually agree with the premise of the question. I drive an electric car, and if I can do Telford and back on an overnight charge and a home charger, yeah, that's plenty of distance. Have we any more technical questions? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. This is around the proposed phosphate mitigation scheme. This is a slightly different one in that the mitigation is going to be done off-site, and certainly there have been questions asked as to whether the site chosen is going to be shared in effect with Kenton Mandeville as well as this site. How are we going to be sure that we're not going to be double counting when you look at other schemes? And
Okay,
also,
can I get an answer to that question?
yeah, I've also got a couple more on.
I know you always do, but can we do one question at a time for the officer's benefit?
Okay, thank you.
I think the issue about mitigation being split out is something that we are going to become very familiar with, because every credit scheme that's being delivered, and the bulk of them are in the River Brue, but I am meeting solicitors to look at one in the Parrot next week. The bulk of those solutions, for instance, if they come forward with 40 kilograms of phosphate credit through a land use change, they will service more than one site, so there's a requirement within the legal agreements that we have a registry of which applicants have bought which credits or acquired which credits, so that obviously we don't get them oversold or double sold. Now, in this instance, the legal agreement will define the area, a red line around the area of woodland that is defined for this site, and that will become part of our land registry because it'll be a search issue, but it'll also be something where we will have a cross-reference as to what mitigation solutions are being located in Cainton Mandeville, for instance, such that a red line turning up rather too regularly is going to fail the discussion we have with Natural England. It is one of the key points we discuss with Natural England. How are we going to define that particular project and its link to a particular planning application?
Thank you very much. Second question, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, just to comment on that, when I was first married, I used to live in that part of the world, so I'm very surprised to hear Parrot catchment. I always associated it with the Brue. The second question I have is, this is going to rely on trees after you've done the temporary fallowing. But we all know that from the point of carbon sequestration, that a tree doesn't reach optimum for that for 20 years.
Councillor Osborne, can I just... apologies for interrupting, but we seem to be debating how phosphates are mitigated rather than a planning application, and I think we should try and keep close to the specifics of this site and its mitigation.
If you'd hear me out, Chairman.
So unless you've got a problem with the mitigation...
I may have, because saplings will not guzzle up as much phosphate as mature trees, and it will take about 20 years for optimum. So are you satisfied in the interim that this is actually going to deliver the amount of phosphate that somebody is buying the credit for, and that residents can be assured that it fully meets the grade, because this is relatively new territory for all of us?
Okay, I'll accept that's very reasonable.
Thank you, Chairman. The issue here is really, it's the land use change. It's not that the trees in this instance are eating up phosphates, it's they're replacing a land use that put phosphates onto the ground. So this is about a neutral position, not a position that strips phosphates. That's part of the wider strategy. So the issue for us is there's a planting regime that puts trees in. Trees do not need fertiliser in the same way that crops or livestock will do, and we can monitor the management of the woodland on a regular or periodic basis. So it's not so much that trees take it out, it's the fact that trees don't require it to be put in.
Thank you for that.
And finally, can you confirm that Wessex Water will indeed upgrade the treatment plants in this area by 2024?
I don't think anybody's going to guarantee what another body's going to do, but they've got a legal obligation to do it. And if they don't do it, their issue is with DEFRA, and them breaching their contract for 5 years' worth of mitigation and upgrades. So again, I think we have to rely on the fact that DEFRA should enforce that issue if Wessex Water fail.
Okay, do we have any further technical questions? No, in that case we can move on to the debate. Sorry, Councillor Whale.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. When considering this application, did you deal with the two villages together, or was it seen purely as a Horton? Because I know this area not quite as well as the people who live there, and they are they're one village really, separated by a bridge with a stream, I think. So was it considered as Broadway or Horton or together?
I think the report focuses on Horton, but there's a recognition that Broadway has taken other residential developments, and I think we refer to it in the report. The issue is that this is one of those areas where when we talk about linked communities or communities that can rely upon each other's resources or facilities, actually there's a lot of duplication. So you have one hall or two halls, you have two churches or one church, both have a pub. So they both replicate quite a lot of what the other does. The issue with Broadway is that Broadway has the health facility and the school, but the school is 1.2 kilometres from Horton. So we could go back to our chart discussion about convenience accessibility, but it's outside of walking distance.
Okay. Is this a question? Okay, in that case, let's move to the debate. And as you have your hand up, Councillor Hobhouse, you can go first.
I have a major problem with this application. I don't think it's been addressed correctly by a number of agencies. And let me start off with the Environment Agency, which did not make any comment at all. So this evening, I've looked on the Environment Agency pollution map, and I can't believe you lot haven't done the same thing. Because you have on your sewage farm, that I guess operates both Broadway and Horton, it is pumping raw sewage into the river. And the situation is, and I know it because I've been through this before in Charlton Adam, that planning considerations cannot deal with environmental pollution because it is not allowed by the government. Now, I find this unbelievable because there is a stream that runs through the village, and the sewage farm is upstream of the village, so that, excuse my language, when people use the loo, it's going to come straight back at them if it's raining, straight down the stream. And I don't understand why this report does not have enforced answers from the Environment Agency. Wessex Water, same detail, and the worst of the lot is the health officer, the environmental health officer, who's got no comments subject to conditions and informatives. And this is a serious health issue which is not getting any better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I shared this division with Councillor Keach, and I am in full agreement with Councillor Keach that we should look to reject this application. And thank you for reminding me, Councillor Hobhouse, because in Broadway there is constant issues around Suggs Lane with sewage. At times it has been known to overflow, and I believe that Wessex Water are supposed to be giving some attention to the matter, and it is closely linked with Horton and would probably flow in that direction. When I heard the officer on our first application arguing against a single development because, my God, it's going to use a car to drive a few hundred metres into Chard, or a few hundred metres to the pub, or to go, horror, to Combe St Nicholas, about less than a mile away. And I thought, if you follow that logic through, this site shouldn't have even seen light of day, because there isn't a bus service of any meaningful description in Horton. One of the main things about sustainability, if you want to reduce car use, there quite simply isn't a bus service. And what bus service there was ceased several years ago when the provider of it went bust, locked his garage, and that was that. So in terms of sustainability of public transport, we haven't got it. You also haven't mentioned, can you put up the plan again, please? Thank you. You also haven't mentioned that this is actually a village, it's a rural settlement, and the rural area, and it is still classed as open countryside with all the protections that go with it, notwithstanding the 5-year housing supply, which not so long ago we had, and then for some reason lost it. And I don't think it was just down to applications not coming forward. There's the small matter that residents from that development will either have to cross through the main way onto Broadway Hill Road, and as residents have pointed, it's actually quite precarious because you've got to cross from the path, then cross back, then cross again, and it is fast. Even today, your speed camera did its job and it recorded a car going at well over the speed limit, and the brakes went on rather hastily, so he got the smiley man. So if people have to cross that, and it is a straight run, because it goes straight to the 303, as you've pointed out. The other crossing, where you could put a pedestrian gate, but rather than do that, you've actually stuck a bungalow there, which actually, it's a case of who's going to be overlooking whom with it, but we'll let that pass. If you were to put a gate there, you still have to cross Pound Road. Well, as we know, Pound Road is full of parked cars, pedestrians, and it is the rat run from Ilminster to Taunton. And at the bottom of Pound Road, what they don't tell you is that's where the River Ding crosses, and it goes to a very, very narrow single-track road with a bridge that not that long ago was actually demolished, and the only thing that was stopping you going into the river was actually plastic barriers. So it actually isn't that safe going that way. So the thought of another 150 cars going down there poses some very serious safety issues. There's actually no way safe for pedestrians to cross. There's no crossing points there at all. You're actually making a bad situation worse. And it is a mini housing estate, and it isn't part of the village, no matter how much you say. It will be an isolated spot.
Are there any planning points you haven't already made? You're saying the same thing over and over.
Well, there is basically landscaping, because I don't think you've actually done your own officer landscape. You're relying on the LVIA, which was done 2 or 3 years ago. You haven't done a specific landscape report for this site as I see it. In fact, I don't think anybody has.
I just asked the officers to respond to that specific.
No, we haven't commissioned a study because we accept that the scheme does sit within the built envelope to the edge of the village. It's not a projection out beyond the village. It has attractive views across it, but they are, other than the private views, they are relatively fleeting views for people travelling along Broadway Hill. So we don't believe that landscape is a sustainable ground for refusal, because if it was, we would refuse most greenfield sites that sit towards the edge of settlements.
Thank you.
But can I also point out that this one is actually in a village that is deemed as a rural settlement, and it does run with Broadway as well. Both of them run together. Both of them have a backlog or a bank of planning applications, as has been pointed out. In fact, it comes to well over 100 houses. These have yet to be built out, so we have yet to see the impact of those on the existing road networks and on the infrastructure.
Thank you. Can I just ask you, John, to clarify the protections from in the NPPF that survive the tilted balance and apply to rural, to the countryside?
The issue, if you look at the local plan, firstly, we don't have settlement boundaries, so we don't have that black and white yes-no position. So every assessment has a degree of judgment to be made to it. The decision you're making with the tilted balance from the NPPF is you start with the local plan, so you start with SS1, SS2, your design policies, but they aren't the end of the discussion. So, a departure from the local plan when you have a 5-year supply might be a very easy way to deal with the scheme. You have to identify not just a departure, but it significantly and demonstrably, the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And it's the sort of the three-dimensional decision you've got to make, because at any appeal, delivering housing will be seen as a good thing. Delivering affordable housing will have a significant or substantial benefit. So the issue for the members who are concerned about scale is to clarify in their minds how the scale of development in relation to this village significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits of housing, particularly the affordable housing. That's the test. It's not just that there's a harm, it's that you've identified that the harm is significantly and demonstrably greater than the benefits.
Thank you very much for that. What I was fishing for was the specific of, I think the only absolute that gets mentioned is isolated buildings in the open countryside. And I think the rest of it is in the balance, as you say. Would you concur?
I mean, we're discussing slightly hypothetical, but you have this sort of iterative approach where you could look at a scheme for 5 houses and say we support that, a scheme for 50, and say the facilities don't support that or justify it. You've got this problem that, as we've already discussed, for one house you might have a view about how far you can walk or drive. For 50 you start to take a different view. That becomes complex, but policy SS2 does facilitate that scaling.
Councillor Potts-Jones.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm underneath the view if we get it wrong, we get it really, really wrong. So I had a really good look at this one. I don't believe from your layouts that the housing lines are in keep. If you look at, I don't know if you can go back to that one for me, please. Sorry, I know you've just switched over. We're going to keep coming back. Keep you on your job. Keep you going. So if you look at the house next door, Nirosh and Avon House, I believe that the housing lines are not in keep with these at all. I think that...
we can just find another way of phrasing
the housing line, I think the housing line here comes out too far on that, whatever colour it is, sorry, I can't tell. That one, and equally with the access and coming out of there, I do think that that might cause issues. 49 dwellings, in my opinion, I believe is overdevelopment. I think it will have an unhealthy impact on the community, especially with those adjoining properties. I can't remember what else I was going to say, but I can leave it at that, but I'm really, really not in favour of supporting this one.
Councillor Whale.
Thank you, Chairman. Back to my point on the coexistence of the two villages. The report seems to, on occasions, treat Horton as one, and then when it comes to facilities, it seems to put the two together. And putting the two together in the amount of houses that have been allocated and built, indeed, in Broadway over there, are we entitled to say, because of the development in all the developments in Broadway and Horton to some degree, that combined with that, this is overdeveloping the village? Villages.
I think, Chairman, well, that is kind of the nub of the issue, which is, as I mentioned, that Horton and Broadway share facilities which are reasonably close but not necessarily walkable, but they're not the range of facilities. So you've got the duplication of a pub in one and a pub in the other, or a hall in one and a hall in the other. So, you know, there is the issue within the local plan where it actually discusses that it's likely that rural settlements that can deliver higher levels of growth are those that have, you know, the greater range of services, facilities and infrastructure. So to that extent, that is a legitimate point for you to form a view on.
Councillor Best?
Yeah, I think it's going back to almost what Evie was saying. I think that if you look at the general character of the rest of the village and then look at what's been put into it, you're grafting in a modern housing estate into a much, much different location, and it doesn't fit. So from that point of view, overdevelopment does come in. It's not maintaining the character of the village. You're trying to introduce a modern style housing estate into a village that's not of that design.
Thank you. Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've all heard some very fine speeches tonight, but I haven't heard any planning reasons to object to this. This committee is quasi-judicial. We cannot object on feelings.
So on which policy basis do my colleagues wish to object? Because I can see no policy basis to object, and so I am minded to vote for approval tonight.
Thank you. Well, I'll risk saying something from the chair. I've heard a lot of passion and a lot of planning discussed, not necessarily at the same time. However, in this particular case, I think Councillor Potts-Jones has actually made a really good point, which has swung me in the room, because I think as you approach the village, you are going to be presented with a two-storey terrace, which is going to be adjacent the footway. And just for the record, I don't accept the arguments over the difficulties of movement to and from this site. I've spent a lot of time around this site examining it very carefully at various times of the day. And yes, you do have to cross the road, but it's a long straight road with good sight lines, and as a human being, you're on the you're crossing at the ridge line. You've got good visibility in both directions. I was doing it many times, and I have the photographs to show. But the point is, it doesn't fit the character of the rest of the village to be coming suddenly across a terrace at 90 degrees to the road, and I do think that is a design feature which would not pass our normal design test, because it doesn't respect the vernacular, really. I mean, it's a street scene issue rather than a vernacular issue, because I do note the hard work that's gone into those buildings, but I just feel like that abrupt wall is a characteristic I wouldn't want. I feel that it's actually at the nub of my reservations. I think this is not a site that I object to in principle, but the form of this, I don't think I personally feel comfortable with it, because of principally the quality of the design. And I am wrestling with myself as to whether that particular harm to the village is actually sufficient to warrant a refusal, given the enormous benefits of the development that we've heard. And I have to say, there are very few developers that would go to such great length to lay out the positives on a site in terms which I think we would probably sign up to. But I just feel like it just fails at that key point, and I'm wondering where I sit at the moment. So, does that help you, Councillor Patrick?
Doubt is always good.
Do we have any others who wish to add to the debate? Does anyone have a particular reason they think we should be considering? If we were to refuse this site, what would the grounds be? Councillor Potts-Jones.
I'm still in belief of overdevelopment, and not I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, this is my first council meeting at this level of planning, but I do not believe that those buildings from the outlook will be in keep with the neighbouring buildings. So if somebody could help me in planning terms, that would be great. Thank you.
In planning terms, I think you can be considering that this layout, design, massing and scale would be out of keeping with the environment, and particularly looking at plot 9, which is the one just by the entrance, which has its own, you could almost argue as to just who is overlooking whom, because it is surrounded very much by other properties and hemmed in there. So I would certainly look at the scale, mass, design, that it does not respect the nature of its settlement surrounding, bearing in mind it is a rural settlement at the end of the day. It is not an urban extension.
Can I just ask, is it SS5, the quality of design policy?
EQ2 is our design quality.
Okay, so That, to me, is the only planning ground I've heard that is specific. Overdevelopment's a very woolly word and doesn't really mean much in specific terms, particularly not given all the evidence that we've heard about how the site has been laid out in terms of elevations. So I'd be very reluctant to go personally with that. But I think we can argue about the fit of the design with the entry points of the village. It's about the only thing I've got that I believe in.
And certainly under that, in terms of the transport policies, it is not necessarily sustainable if you are looking to reduce the use of the private car, which is what you argued on the first application, because there is no public transport as such. So in this community, you'll be putting an extra 49 dwellings there where the residents will be dependent, whether you like it or not, on a private car, and that will include taking their children to Naroche School or whichever school lies within the vicinity that they can actually at the moment get their children into.
I have to say, the private car, we did actually decide that that was not an overriding factor, so it's difficult to argue that the members were on that particular side because we actually approved that, if you remember.
I certainly do recall we approved it, but I must admit we still use that logic of argument. And in this case, you were talking about one car or two cars. In this case, you will be talking about 150 extra cars on very rural roads.
Councillor Patrick.
Chair, I'm slightly alarmed that our only opposition in terms of policy to this application is that we don't like the look of it. According to what I can see, I personally think the design is pretty high quality, meets EQ2 policy for the local plan, and of course I think committee members need to remember we do not have a 5-year land supply.
I have to say I agree with your point. Okay, Councillor Potts-Jones.
Can I ask the officer if you can give us some reasons for objection, please, and help us out a little bit here? Thank you.
I think the member training suggested that that ball starts in your court. So we've had two approaches. One is the scale of development, and Councillor Potts-Jones mentioned scale, and I think scale is different to design. Scale is, do you have a problem with 49 in this location with the facilities that are accessible? That is a point of principle. The alternative is that there are certain properties that are close to boundaries and that there's a design to the access which is hard up to the edge of the pavement and therefore contrasts with the more setback and more subdued entrance into the village. That's a design principle which could be responded to, but if that was the design principle that you said that's our key concern, it's about the alien design, not the inappropriate. It's not bad design. You know, these are individually designed properties. So the issue is, have they got the right solution for design? And if you're coming at it from a design agenda, you can have a view that there are elements that don't work. But the other point that I think the members will need to resolve is actually have they got an issue about the scale, because it keeps being referred to and then departed from.
And equally, in the tilted balance, we have to be persuaded that the issue that we do have with scale overrides the opportunity for a very substantial amount of housing to be provided for people, which will allow people to live in the village, and that includes a substantial affordable housing element as well. So it's a balance. Councillor Whale.
Sure. Would I be right in suggesting that the development which has been either taken place or has been permitted, which are mostly in Broadway, that they number some 100 plus, I think, from memory. I've sat through the applications for those as well in a past committee. So surely we could say that for the local facilities, the number of houses that have been allocated or will be built is overdevelopment for those facilities. It must be.
I understand how you're working that, but we've had professional advice that that's not the case. It's an opinion, not a professional opinion. We've had, you're arguing with people who are indemnified to make judgments on these things. So, Councillor Osborne.
I think we can be debating the merits or demerits of this application for most of the night, and I think some of us have a position. I would like to propose that we overturn the officer recommendation and that we refuse this application.
And sorry, can you give us a reason for refusal with that proposal?
God, even the microphone's playing up tonight. My reasons for refusal would be, well, it could be numerous actually. The design, scale, massing of the development is inappropriate to the scale of what is a rural settlement. And bearing in mind that there is already consented planning which hasn't yet commenced building, this could be an oversupply.
A couple of things you need to bear in mind. We must be able to absolutely prove the reasons for refusal, otherwise the authority will end up both seeing this overturned at appeal, and we will probably be punished at appeal by damages. So it's few reasons and ones which can be absolutely shown.
Just because you lose, you don't always get done for costs, providing you have behaved reasonably. And I believe in this case we are behaving reasonably.
Reasonable isn't sufficient here. You have to behave lawfully. And in this particular case, you're talking to an authority, the predecessor of whom was fined for winning an appeal.
Mr. Chair, I intend to abstain from voting on this because the last occasion from Area East, when we turned down 27 houses in Charlton Adam on the grounds that there was raw sewage going down a ditch within 5 metres of the houses, the inspector overturned our decision, and on the grounds that we couldn't make a decision about environmental health matters because they weren't part of the planning scheme. And that's a warning to people who want to take the raw sewage issue as a planning reason.
I wasn't proposing to take that one.
Okay, you've lumped scale, form and massing together into one sentence. Do you mean scale, do you mean form, or do you mean massing, because they're different things?
We can take them as separate.
Only if you can substantiate them. I'm not having this committee making a perverse vote and bringing down a large fine simply to play all the cards that might work, because that really punishes us. John, can you...
Chairman, thanks. I mean, the issues that we're talking about there, scale, to my mind, will equate to numbers. So scale is about the amount of the stuff. Form and massing is about the design. So the form and massing might be entirely appropriate. You might say this form and massing works if there were fewer units in it. So I think the issue really is there's a point of principle, which is scale. And if you've got a concern with scale, then SS2 does allow you to have that discussion about what is the appropriate scale. Form and massing gets into a design argument about something which actually a lot of people have said individually these dwellings are well designed. There's an attempt to try and create some sort of streetscape. If you feel there are too many houses, there is a different way of trying to do that. But my feeling is that arguing design other than potentially the dwellings that adjoin the road, which create this sort of designed entrance rather than informal entrance. You know, you could pick on one or two dwellings and say, actually, that creates a character that is not typical of this part of the village. I suspect if I did an urban design sort of step back, I could find key buildings at junctions, you know, if I really looked hard, but that's not the way this part of the village works. But I do think that scale is a separate issue, and that scale is really where you need to go with the yes or no, and that the other elements, massing and design, are sort of getting to the edges of the scheme in terms of not quite subjective judgments, but they're all resolvable.
In that case, Chairman, we take it on scale.
Okay, well, what I'm going to propose is that we actually decide whether we feel we've got robust reasons for refusal before we look at the officer's recommendation. Because otherwise we place ourselves in the awkward position of having determined an application without good reason. So I'd like to have the good reason in place first. So we're talking specifically about the number of dwellings in the site with scale. So,
Chairman, can we move to a vote without a seconder?
That's a good point. Do we have a seconder for the scale? Right. So there's a valid question on scale. Do we have a view? If we're going to debate this issue, do we have a view as to what the appropriate scale might be?
If I could advise, Chairman, I think you've got to look at the one that's in front of you rather than we sit here trying to talk about what would be the ideal, because there are differing objectives. That some councillors think that this is actually okay, and others who think this is too much. So I think we just need to form a view about 49 primarily. And then if there are units that should have been rejigged and you went down the refusal route, you could cite the units that are particularly harmful in terms of your concern about site.
Okay, so I think I've got a proposal and a seconder for the 49 units is too many for this site. Can I have a show of hands on that?
I'm still unclear of why we are not addressing the design to access, please.
One at a time.
We take them one at a time here, do we? Okay, thank you.
So I've got a proposer and a seconder for the scale of 49 is too much for this site. Can I have a show of hands of those who think that that is true?
Chair, can I just want to clarify what exactly you're doing and how you're doing this, because are you making kind of an informal vote on aspects of the resolution that you're putting forward and the proposal you're putting forward?
It's quite clear to me from the debate that there is a substantive, that there's a substantial risk of a vote on the officer's recommendation being refused, and therefore I want to know the basis of that in order to form potentially reasons for refusal should it happen. Otherwise, we run the risk of having determined an application without good reason. So I need to understand the committee's reasons for these things. So I think that was 4. Can I see those?
I understand that, but so that the vote that you're taking now is not part of the resolution. That's what I'm saying, because you can't have loads of resolutions on one application. If you, yes, that's what I'm saying. You're asking whether they're okay with just that aspect, and I got the impression you were coming back with something else afterwards. Well, we can't do that in a vote situation. You would have to just ask them to make their that would be the vote just on scale, and if that's one, that's one, and if it's lost, and you go to another proposal. But you can't take each element of what might be a proposal forward.
I follow your logic. Okay.
Yeah.
So in that case, we'll have to examine the other issue, which was the design, which Councillor Potts and I both agree that the entrance to the village, the terrace there is not in keeping with that part of the village and would be odd in the street scene. Alien, I think, was the phrase. And so that would be a design reason against policy. And it sounds to me as though what we've got to do is be certain in our minds that both reasons stand up before we adopt that as a reason for refusal, because it's only the one vote that we get. And it might be that you've got one objection, you're happy with one objection and not happy with the other objection. But unfortunately, that doesn't leave us with any resolution as to whether we can move further. So can I have a show of hands for those who think that both the number 49 is too high and that building at the front is on its own a sufficient reason for refusal on design?
Is this a formal vote to refuse the application?
Can I just, so the proposal that was put forward by Councillor Osborne, I think, was just on the scale. So if that's being changed, if the proposal's being changed to look at two elements now, then someone needs to propose that and have it seconded to allow the vote to take place on those two reasons. Yeah.
To propose to refuse the application.
Okay. In which case, I withdraw my design thing because what? Councillor Whale?
I suggest that I would like to have another reason for refusal, which would be the number 49 new dwellings is overdevelopment in relation to the local facilities and for the number of planning applications which have been permitted in this area.
I think you would have to stand up your evidence, given that all the officers have said it's not overdevelopment for, where's your evidence base for that decision?
The evidence should come from the officer. Tell us how many applications have been, are awaiting and have been permitted in Broadway and Horton, which I think the numbers are well over 100 awaiting.
John, I think that's in the report. Could you just clarify?
At the moment, we have applications for 35, 26 and 9 in Broadway awaiting solutions. One of those is a reserved matters application, so the principle's been established. So those are the 3 live applications in Broadway, although there are others within the parish. The issue that Councillor Whale is raising is this the construct within SS2 that says consider the range of facilities within the village, and that will impact on the amount of development you can take. The example it uses is a village which has a railway station and significant employment, and suggests that becomes self-contained. So I think that the point that the councillors who have a concern with are saying that effectively Horton itself is not a self-contained village, and therefore the scale of development is going to lead to out-commuting. Now, when you come back to your electric car point, the local plan wasn't written on the basis of carbon and electric cars, and indeed, we are left with a legacy of vehicle movements based on us going and visiting shops, not Ocado coming to us, which was part of the, I suppose, the environment in 2012, 2013. But the point for the members who have concern about scale is that you need to link the development of scale here. We don't need to mention the other sites because that's part of any appeal statement you do, but it's the proximity and range of facilities, how day-to-day usable they are, and the likely need for out-commuting for other day-to-day facilities. And whilst it's not uncommon for us and members to disagree, that is an evidence-based position. The trick for you is actually to determine that that evidence outweighs the benefit of the housing, but that is an evidence-based position. Design becomes a harder point other than making a specific point about particular units, because underlying it is a good design. If you had a concern about 1 or 2 units, the issue is is that harm significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits of the scheme? So the design is a tricky one because we can look at it and say, I wouldn't have designed it that way myself, but equally I look at it and say there has been a design process that's been gone through to create this scheme, which is, not necessarily 100% common with applications that come in. So I would say it is good design. You may not feel it is the most appropriate design for the location, but part of that is the harm from their interpretation of good design sufficient to outweigh the benefits.
Thank you again, useful. Councillor Whale, do you have a proposal that you want to put?
Well, from what I've been told, there is 70 awaiting in the scheme of things, and how many sites have been completed within the last 5 years? Is that not relevant?
I understand. Well, it is relevant, but I asked if you have a proposed motion that you want to put to the committee.
As I said, I think the number of the 49 new dwellings is overdevelopment in relation to the local facilities as in SS2, taking into consideration the amount of applications and built-out houses which have been approved.
And presumably also the containment issue.
And
presumably also the containment issue of it would encourage commuting out. Do we have a seconder?
Jumping in again. We do have a proposal and a seconder on the table. So when we were coming back, I thought you were coming back to establish more, if any, grounds for refusal. So if Councillor Wells another proposal of its own right, rather than adding it to anything else, then
I understand the point you're making.
Needs to go first.
Can I ask Councillor Osborne, I think you made the original proposal for overdevelopment. Are you willing to adopt the wording of the proposal which has been proposed by Councillor Whale, and we could make that a substantive issue? Just before we go further, do you want to say something?
Could I just make a recommendation that maybe there's three people that seem to have a proposal in mind, all in separate bits. Would it be useful for us to pause for a couple of minutes so those three people
Yes, please.
could gather a proposal together that we could then ask for seconder and then take a vote on if the chair would accept that?
I think that is quite reasonable. We've reached 8 o'clock and I appreciate we've got a busy agenda ahead of us. So can I suggest that we reconvene at 8:05? Thank you. Okay, I'm going to reconvene the meeting. Do you have a proposition for us?
I do, Chairman. I propose that we overturn the officer's recommendation for the following planning reasons. The scale of 49 dwellings is too high for this site and location within a rural settlement. 49 new dwellings is overdevelopment in relation to the local facilities as per SS2 and will encourage out commuting, as the number of applications that have already been consented for within Horton and Broadway who do share facilities is well in excess of over 100, with more applications still in the pipeline behind this one.
Okay, thank you.
And also, as well, in terms of design, it is also felt that the design, particularly by the access, is inappropriate again for this development and out of keeping with the rest of the village design style.
Can I just ask you, that you put on at the end for the design, is that just as information for the applicant, or is that part of your total reasons?
That would be part of my reasons, but if I am allowed an informative, I would also comment.
Okay, look, I don't want to make a very long job of this. I want to ask the planning officer if he's content that he can work with that reason for refusal.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, yeah, we've sort of sketched out the structure, and I don't think we're a million miles apart. I think we probably wouldn't refer to all the previous consents because at appeal, that would be just part of the case. So I think the sort of the commentary you're making is that the proposed development is located in a rural settlement. So it is the subject of policies SS1 and SS2, which defines the circumstances under which development will be permitted. I mentioned earlier that paragraph 530 of SS2 preamble does explain that within rural settlement tier there is scope to deliver higher levels of growth at settlements, for instance where they've got strong employment or good sustainable transport links. So notwithstanding the range of facilities that are available within Horton, many of these do not meet day-to-day needs, and those within Broadway are sufficiently separate to require private vehicles. As such, the scale of development is likely to result in significant outcommuting. That would be, I think, the theme that has been put forward, that Broadway and Horton do have facilities, but they're duplicated. They're not day-to-day, they're top-up or occasional. So within the range of facilities they've got, they're good. You know, there's a lot there for the village, but they're not ones you can rely upon to be self-contained. I would say if you wanted a design refusal, I'd make it a separate one just so it's clear when you're trying to deal with an appeal, which bits relate to which.
Okay, in the light of that, do you still want to keep the design in the reason, or do you want to make that an informative that informs any further application that might come forward?
Chairman, can I raise a point of order?
If it is a point of order.
I feel like this decision-making process is all back to front. I would like to seek some advice from the legal representative about whether this is the correct way to be doing this.
We've had that advice. So what I'm now going to do is we've had the proposal. The planning officer has given his views as to the underlying planning reasons that could support that refusal, and I'm just going to ask the legal representative. I'm presuming at this point we just need a vote on the officer's recommendation, and then to add the reasons. Is that correct?
On the members' proposal, you're taking a vote on the members' proposal, yes.
Okay.
If everybody is in agreement with what was said as the proposal, or the member who proposed it is in agreement, that's her proposal, and the seconder is happy with what has been proposed.
So as I understand it, you're on scale of development and you want to note the design as an
I would want to note the design as you say, as an informative to be also be raised at appeal in terms of the inappropriateness of design at the access and being out of keeping with the rest of the village design styles. I could also comment on plot 9 that I think has a real issue with being overlooked. But
I think we're wandering back into an over-complex resolution. You had put a set of words and the planning officer had given an opinion on that plan of words. That set of words, I think we should stick with the original that was read out.
okay, I will stick with my original proposal.
I have a further point of order, please, Chair. I feel that this proposal is blasting the debate completely out of the water. We're ending the debate too soon. The decision, if they are minded to make a decision or a proposal to refuse this, according to their reasoning, we should move to the vote. I'm unclear why we're doing this in this way.
Well, I'm trying to get there. The legal representative wants to say something.
I just think we're trying to establish what the actual reasons for refusal are and what members are voting on. And even then, I was just a bit concerned whether what you're looking for really is set out, if you looked at it on a piece of paper, would be bullet points of reason for refusal, 1, this, 2, this, 3, this. You know, they don't have to be, you can elaborate on what it is. So if you've just mentioned, you mentioned your design aspect, and then we're asked, was that an informative? If it's an informative, it won't be debated at an appeal. It might be touched on, but it wouldn't be a reason for refusal. So in making your proposal, you need to be sure what your actual reasons for refusal are that will go forwards, and that you have evidence, and we can support those reasons with evidence.
Can I just clarify? Reasons for refusal are taken as a set, and so you've got to be both disappointed with 49 dwellings and disappointed with design. You can't be just one of them, otherwise the appeal will go against you for being unreasonable. And I'm getting a nod. So do we want to make design a reason in its own right, or are we happy that we would refuse the application if it was, let's say, 26 dwellings and that design on the corner was inappropriate? I can't see that, in my view, I could support both. I can understand the 49. So are we just one reason for refusal, which is the scale of development?
Chairman, it would be normal to put on a reason for refusal which reflects the fact that at this point in time we don't have a signed legal agreement, so it's just the steer to the applicant that if they appeal, they do need to deal with the issues that we'd identified in the Section 106 as being necessary to make the scheme acceptable. So that would be, the point of determination, the scheme doesn't satisfactorily deliver the social and community infrastructure required by policies, etc., etc.
That sounds very much like a third reason.
Chair, could I humbly and respectfully suggest that the reason we're making such a ham fist of this is because the policy reasons to refuse this don't exist. I think we should move on to continue the debate.
I think we've now reached the point where a proposal has been made which we're trying to clarify, which sounds to me as though it's now 3 reasons for refusal: the failure to provide, the Section 106 not being in place, the scale of development and the design as 3 separate issues which have been debated at some length in this chamber, and if you feel that you are unable to agree with that, then you simply vote against it. And I'm getting a nod from legal. So are you content for that to be put to the vote in that form? The 3 reasons of the Section 106 not being in place, the scale of the development being inappropriate, and the design not being in keeping with the street scene in the village.
Chair, are we going to be able to debate this proposal before we vote on it?
No, we've had a debate, and this is a resolution of that. You are at liberty to vote contrary to this. Waiting for the proposers to confirm that you're content with those three reasons as being substantive.
Okay, but I just want to qualify that 49 new dwellings is an overdevelopment as seen in relation to local facilities and will encourage out commuting, and the number of applications that have already been consented in Horton and Broadway which share facilities.
So you're persisting against the officer advice not to mention the other?
Not to mention.
You help us here.
I'm simply saying that you don't need to, because the reason for refusal is the village has been overdeveloped. If the applicant chooses to appeal, as part of our case, we set out that there's a history to this village, which has been all these other sites that have been approved. We don't have to put it into this decision. You know, that's part of the background to why we've got to this decision, but we don't have to actually include it in the reason for refusal. The statements are usually quite a lot longer than the reason for refusal that, that we would issue on a decision. I think the outstanding issue is whether you believe that design is of itself a standalone ground for refusal. That's where I'm not certain that we've got sort of agreement, but...
I do tend to concur with you in that I would not be refusing just on the on that corner building, but I would be okay, so it's three reasons at the moment. Councillor Osborne? You're the proposer of this motion. I'm just making sure that that this is something which we've got on record, that you actually... so we've got scale of development not appropriate, the design not in keeping, and the section 106 not in place. And we'll leave it to the officers to actually explain the detail of the reasons based upon the debate that we've had. Are you content?
I am content.
In that case, we have a proposal with a seconder. Can I have all those in favour of refusal for those three reasons, please show now.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hang on, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep.
And those against?
2.
And those abstaining?
1.
Thank you very much. I think we've done the work up front for the reasons for refusal, so so let's move swiftly on.
Can I just say, so we've got 4 hours as a maximum duration,
So
including, so we would need to leave, we've got, what do we have, 5-minute break? So we've got till 9:35, and that's the maximum.
Okay, so I am reminded that we have until 9:35, and then we'll have to defer matters if we haven't.
If we get to that point, we're adjourning the meeting. We're not stopping, we're just adjourning it to continue another day.
Are we adjourned?
So you have got to restart.
So we're just checking to see whether. Can we have quiet, please? Yeah. So we're just checking to see whether we adjourn the meeting if we run over time, or whether this goes to a fresh agenda. But 9:35 is a deadline we've got to keep. So the next application before us is planning application 203708 out, land at Goldwell Farm, Yeovil Road, Crooken. Who's taking this? Is this you, John? It's you, Catherine.
We're paying, but please can I request a comfort break? Have we? We were sorting the application out, so we were not able to take advantage of that break.
Okay, we'll take a...
And I do have a human right to appeal.
Let's not debate. Can I have your attention, please? We've had a debate, and we actually think that the Perry Street South Chard one, we think we're going to be out of time to give that the proper hearing that it deserves. So the proposal is that we defer that from this agenda and bring it up at the next meeting. I'm sorry to have wasted your evening, but as you can see, we've had a very intensive session and been caught on the horns of the dilemma by holding the meeting at a start time that was convenient to people. We've had a lot of uptake of that time. So I do apologise to those who've turned up for the South Chard thing, but I think we're going to have to defer it from the agenda. We will put it on first next time. Okay? That would be...
23rd. It's, yeah. What is, I haven't got the, I've got calendar in front of me. 27th of June.
27th of June, and we will be looking at the start time at the back end of this meeting. Thank you. Okay, so if we can deal with agenda item number 7, land at Goldwell Farm, Yeovil Road, Crookhern. Can we have the officer presentation, please?
Okay, this is, as it says up there, an outline application with access to be determined, but all other matters, including appearance, landscape, layout and scale, to be reserved for future consideration. At this stage, it's essentially seeking to establish the principle of the development and the access arrangements. This is the site location, which is just up here within Crookhern. It's located to the northeast of Crookhern with the CLR site, which is just to the south. And it has footpaths running to the east and to the west of the site, and you can see the other footpaths nearby on the plan. This is a site plan showing the site. It's 5.2 hectares of agricultural land. The A30 Yeovil Road runs just to the south of the site. We've got Wadham School just over here, and this is the kind of housing, Ashlands Road, and housing developments existing up there. This is an aerial photograph which shows it's five fields of arable and pasture land, mainly enclosed by hedgerows with interspersed trees. And then we've got some photographs just showing the kind of the site context. This is a view up. This is the A30 there's a grade 2 listed pillbox just here with Ashlands Road just up here on the right hand side. This shows the site entrance on the right hand side with Wadham School on the left hand side. This is the view looking south along Ashlands Road towards Yeovil Road and the A30 with the site access on the left-hand side here. And at Wadham School beyond the trees on the right-hand side. These two photographs show the view towards the site entrance, which is just here. And this is a view back northwest along Ashlands Road, and you can see the newish housing developments up there. This is the footpath that runs along the western edge of the site, and this is looking east into the site entrance, and a view northwest across the site. And this is a view from the footpath looking east across the site, and one looking to the southeast. And this is the A30 Yeovil Road. This is a parameter plan which would be conditioned as part of any planning permission. It sets the broad parameters for the principles of development, as all matters are reserved apart from access. So this just kind of establishes the development areas which are shown in yellow here. This is the kind of development parcels. We've got this area here which would be retained as agricultural land. This would be public open space, but also sustainable drainage area with an area of natural open space here. Some amenity public open space, which would have a children's play area and some youth facilities. So this just kind of establishes those broad parameters. During the course of the application, it was reduced from up to 85 to 67 dwellings, removing development up in this eastern portion of the site up here. And just to kind of set the context, this was a previous application on the site which covered a much larger area. As you can see, it included all this land down here. And this was a 2013 scheme for 110 houses, which was dismissed at appeal. But as I said, it covers a much larger area, and it included development parcels up in this part of the site, down here, and within the central area, which, as now proposed, is public open space. This was the parameter plan pre-amendment, which included this development parcels up here. This just really to show how the scheme's evolved to where we've got to now. This is the illustrative master plan, which shows how the site could be developed to accommodate the quantum of development proposed, which is for 67 homes. As you can see on this plan, you can see the CLR development, which has planning permission just to the south here. The illustrative master plan shows a mixture of unit types. It allows for car parking in line with the council's parking standards. There are various linkages and footpaths, as well as the access with the open space and the SUDs and a swale corridor running across here, which would also be incorporated within the public open space. So basically, this demonstrates that the site can accommodate the level of development proposed in an acceptable way in terms of achieving acceptable layout, acceptable amenity standards, retention of existing hedgerows, and this has a density based on just the development areas, so these development areas here, so not including all the public open space, of 38 dwellings per hectare. This is the access plan, which the Highways Authority have reviewed and have confirmed that they consider this to be acceptable. They confirmed that the visibility is acceptable. The access is opposite Wadham School, which is just over on this side, which is recognised that can become congested at drop-off and pick-up time, but Highways Authority consider the use of a box junction would prevent this from happening, and that could be dealt with at the technical approval stage. In addition, there are currently no parking restrictions on the eastern side of Ashlands Road, and to minimise conflict between pedestrians and cyclists and motor vehicles, it's required that both sides should be have restrictions, and that would need to be dealt with through a traffic regulation order, which would be secured through the Section 106. Sweat path drawings have been provided, which demonstrate that the site can accommodate a level of a vehicle of the required size. There was some more information required on that, but the Highways Authority considered that there's sufficient space within the red line to accommodate that. There are various uncontrolled pedestrian crossings proposed here and here, with tactile pavings and other minor improvements which are welcomed, and a travel plan is submitted, which would also be secured through the Section 106. So the key considerations for this application is the principle of development and access, which are the elements being considered at this stage, with everything else reserved for future consideration. As the council doesn't currently have a 5-year housing land supply, which we've already touched on the previous application, paragraph 11 of the MPPF is engaged, and the tilted balance is engaged. So that means that planning permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so demonstrably and significantly outweigh the benefits. The committee report goes through all of these issues in detail, but obviously the delivery of 67 houses, 35% of which would be affordable, is a substantial benefit that does weigh in favour of the development. The illustrative master plan submitted shows how the site could be developed to provide sufficient landscaping, the retention of hedgerows, mix of units, parking, etc. And the parameter plan, which would set certain elements, would be conditioned to secure that. The application was amended during the course of the application, primarily in response to landscape impact concerns. And the landscape officer, our consultant that we use, has come back and confirmed that he considered it now to be acceptable in landscape impact terms, with the level of green infrastructure proposed and amenity space, and other consultants have confirmed that there are no adverse impacts in terms of flooding and drainage. The LLFA ecology is considered to be acceptable. Section 106 contributions will be provided towards certain things, which I'll come on to in a minute. So, yeah, I'm just double checking that, yep, there's no heritage, so we've got no heritage adverse impacts. The grade 2 listed World War II pillbox doesn't have any intervisibility with the site, so that's considered to be acceptable. I'd missed out the reason for recommendation within the committee report, so I have just drafted one now to include, which basically says that the proposal, by reason of its location, scale and access, is considered to be acceptable to the character of the site and the surrounding area and would not have a detrimental impact on ecology, flood risk, residential amenity, highway safety, and is in a location considered to be sustainable, which I think is spelt wrong, subject to conditions and the Section 106 agreement. The proposed development is considered to accord with the South Somerset local plan and advice contained within the NPPF. So on that basis, the recommendation is to approve, subject to the following planning obligations, which includes affordable housing, education contributions, NHS contributions, contribution towards play space, youth facilities and playing pitches, travel plan, traffic regulation order, the phosphates mitigation strategy, and the provision of management of public open spaces, as well as the conditions set out in the committee report. And that's it.
That was a very swift canter through.
Sorry, was I a bit quick?
So in terms of public speakers, I have no speakers registered as objectors on this, is that correct? None as supporters. I have the applicant, Georgina Nelson, who's an agent. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair and councillors. I am Georgina Nelson, the Chartered Town Planning Consultant representing the applicant Gleeson. The outline application before you is for a development of up to 67 new homes. The application initially sought permission for 85 homes, but this has been reduced since the application was submitted in 2020 in response to consultee responses received, in particular landscape. Residential development has now been omitted from the fields that were considered most visible. Residential development is proposed on a smaller area within the Red Line location plan, and therefore the Council's appointed landscape expert recommends approval subject to conditions. The determination of the application has been prolonged due to the need for the application to provide a phosphate solution. The solution has been agreed with Natural England and is provided on site. This replaces existing septic tanks with an on-site sewage package treatment plant, which will serve the existing buildings at the adjacent farm and the new homes. All other technical matters have also been resolved, and as a result, no technical consultee has objected to the application. Highways officers fully support this application, as when considered together with the CLR development, the impact on the local highways infrastructure is found to be acceptable, as it does not give rise to an objection on traffic generation or highway safety grounds, and accords with policy. The applicant's team has worked with officers to resolve all planning matters prior to this committee. A comprehensive Section 106 includes 35% affordable housing and contributions towards transport, education, youth facilities, sports pitches, changing rooms, and a contribution towards the NHS. This is in addition to SIL payments. The application provides economic, social, and environmental benefits of providing 67 homes, including 23 new affordable homes, to be social rented and first homes. An indicative master plan forms part of the application, which demonstrates how the site can be developed to deliver a suitable development of new homes for the sustainable Crewcombe location. The new homes are teamed with landscaping, public open space and on-site children's play area. The development proposals are in accordance with Somerset's adopted policies. There is full officer support for the application. No objections have been received from any consultee. The application proposals were held to deliver the housing that Somerset requires to boost its shortfall of housing land supply of only 3.7 years. We therefore politely request that you vote in accordance with your officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I gather that Councillor Dance wants to address us as ward member.
Yes, please. Thank you for that, Peter. I will try and make it as quick as I can, but I do have quite a few points. Okay, as you're all aware, you would have seen the officer's report a moment ago. This is there was a much larger application on this site, which was refused by SSDC and was also refused at appeal. These issues at the appeal have still not been addressed. Changing since this application, obviously you've got the reduce of numbers of housing. The exit is onto Ashlands Road instead of the A30. But for me, the traffic survey was done in the school holiday. Surprise, surprise. The access is even more dangerous than before the proposal. Ashlands is a very busy road, as you will all be aware, and estate. There are parked cars all over the road. I was there yesterday meeting residents. With parents drop off in the morning and in the same in the afternoon. The proposed TRO to stop parking outside the school isn't going to work. You all know that parents will have to drop their children off and that won't stop them from parking there. We see it all the time. Unless there's enforcement, there won't be enforcement. And if the drop-offs is done on the A30, well, this just causes more mayhem. The appeal failed from the impact of the views for Crewcombe by the development, as it is an outward-facing slope. Just by removing some of the houses doesn't specifically reduce this issue. If you compare the COR with this development, the COR has far more direct pedestrian paths into towns, where Goldwells is primarily down East Street, which had less substantial pavements. Also, the lack of cycle paths, the pavements are unlit, the walkways are dangerous, cars parking all over the place in these areas. But for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might have read it wrong in the report, as this was previously should have been dealt with by SSDC, so it's come to me rather late in the day. One of the points in the report I see is that car parking, some properties will only have one space. Can you correct me in a second if that's true? Because if that is true, then I know for one that even one-bedroom houses, I for my own have 2 vehicles, and if a visitor come, I'd need more. So if that is the case, you could look at refusal on some of them grounds. Also, there's already 525 homes on the opposite side of the A30, which are being built, and there's going to be a further 110 homes and a care home. That's 635. As portfolio holder for public health, equality and diversity here in Somerset, our doctor's surgery, especially Crewcombe, is at breaking point. We've been looking to try and get support into the Crewcombe GP practice. There just isn't the infrastructure. You can chuck money as much as you like, but we cannot recruit doctors here in Somerset. You've seen the state of the NHS dentistry, and the schools are at breaking point. I urge this committee to refuse this application and bring some sense back into this area. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can we start off with officer's response to those, please?
Yep. So the previous appeal scheme, which I can just get up, I'll start with that one first. This is the 110 appeal scheme. It was refused on 3 grounds. I think landscape, the impact on the A30, which is down here in the kind of landscape and corridor of that, and access to the town centre by non-modes of transport. This had development on what was considered to be the more visible kind of elements of the site, the higher up elements, which would be more visible in longer range views. So that was where the kind of the most impact was, and obviously with this scheme that's been removed, and our landscape consultant has confirmed with the amendments proposed that the scheme is considered to be acceptable in landscape terms. The other reason for refusal was the impact on the A30, because there was an access coming in off on the A30. There's no access now along here, so there's no change to this route. The Highways Authority has confirmed in their response that although some of the routes into the town centre aren't ideal in terms of pedestrian and cycle routes, they're considered to be acceptable and offer a reasonable walking distance that accords with Manual for Streets, and are considered to be acceptable, and that, in their opinion, a reason for refusal on that basis couldn't be substantiated. Obviously, this CLR site opposite will provide additional routes and routes into the town centre once that's complete as well. There was issue about car parking raised. This is an outline scheme, and I can't remember the parking standards off the top of my head, I'm afraid, for one-bed units. But this shows that. Sorry?
1.5, I think.
Okay, but this is an illustrative layout, but the actual level of car parking and parking for each unit would be dealt with at the reserved matters stage. So that would be something that we would look at and make sure that it does accord with those standards. In terms of doctor surgery and education, I mean, John touched on that in the previous scheme. All we can do really is rely on the advice we're getting from consultees in terms of our education and the NHS, and contributions are being sought towards those elements, as well as towards playing pitches and sports provision. That's kind of as far as we can take it in terms of our input into that process. We can only kind of go on what we're being told by our colleagues in education and the health service as to what's being sought.
As a ward member, do I get the right to reply on that? Sorry, because we did when it was
I'm sorry, you're not
SSDC.
part of the debate, you're not on the committee,
Right.
but the members...
Well, some of that information is wrong.
Well, I was just going to query we're moving to members who've got technical queries and questions.
At Parish Council, there's two Parish Councils here
Not
wanting to speak.
not
Mary
registered to
and
speak.
Cruiken.
They're not registered to speak.
Well,
the
they've been
rules on
sat here
speak.
through the whole meeting.
Councillor Dance, you're not on the committee, and the rules for running the planning committee were given to us by the Constitution Committee, and there's only limited leeway. It's been widely publicised that you've got to register well before the meeting to speak. I was going
What
to
about
ask...
the chair's discretion? Because you've counselled the other meeting, couldn't we do a chair's
Councillor
discretion?
Dance,
Because
I'll
they've
exclude
sat
you
here
from
the
the
whole
meeting if
time.
you're going to interrupt.
But they have sat here the whole time.
I appreciate this. I'm not giving leeway to that. It was really widely publicised, and well, that may be down to the member, but please do not take part in this debate anymore. Can I just ask, you mentioned the health service provision. There's a section 106 covering some elements of that, isn't there?
Yes, there is a section 106, and there is actually just a quick update on that. In the consultation summary, there was an updated comment following the initial response, just to amend the contribution being sought to relate to market housing only, not to include the affordable housing element of that, which is referenced later on in the report, but there is just an update on that in terms of the consultee response. But I think, as John probably explained earlier on the previous application, the NHS work out how many people will be generated by the development and how much extra space is required on a square meterage for additional health care provision that will be generated by the development. And as a contribution, they use a specific formula, and I think it works out about, it's 576 per market dwelling contribution would be required towards NHS.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Best.
Right, I've got quite a few questions, so if I take them one at a time. I'll go on to the NHS thing, seeing you've just talked about that. In page 106, you've got the figure of the current list size plus what the implication of this site was. But as you well know, we've got about 800 or 900 other houses. What are the figures including those?
I can't comment on those, but the NHS provide comments on each application and cumulatively.
Yeah, but if we're looking at a cumulative effect, you should be giving us the information on those planning applications.
The NHS did not make bids on previous schemes, so they missed the opportunity to take funding. Councillor Best and I are in discussion with the wider NHS about Crewken and what might be delivered. But for this application, the NHS have simply asked for money to allow them to do an expansion. As I've said, the quality of service is down to the NHS.
Into all the cul-de-sacs, and it will cause even more chaos than there is at the moment. The secondary on that is, in the drawings, they show the turning of the vehicle, the lorry. It takes a substantial amount of road to be able to straighten up. So turning in, the cars would have to be well back for it even to enter. Is that? I've looked at plenty of these before, and I've never seen such an amount of turn to be able to get in a straight line entering a road.
Firstly, on the school issue, and I think this is probably something you raised with the Highways Authority directly, and then they commented back in response to that, and they didn't raise an objection. They considered it to be an acceptable, with the box junction, which they specifically referenced, or an alternative which can be dealt with at the technical approval stage, they considered to be acceptable. In terms of the, sorry, what was your last query? It's gone. Yeah. Oh, the swept path. Yeah. So the swept path, the Highways Authority originally asked for a swept path based on the largest refuse vehicle the council has, which is 11.4 metres, I think. The applicant did submit that, and there was a slight issue with it that the Highways Authority had, but the Highways Authority confirmed that they were confident that within the red line there was sufficient space to accommodate the size vehicle that is the largest, which is actually 10.8 or something, it's not 11.4. They considered there was sufficient space within the site to accommodate the swept path that was considered to be acceptable. I mean, I'm not an expert in swept paths, but so I take my, input from the Highways Authority, who were satisfied that it works from a highway safety point of view.
Okay, moving on to one of the main ones for me is, as is very clear from page 93, this is an application for the parish of Merriott. So it is an extension to the village of Merriott. Merriott is a substantial village just off of Crewken, but in this case, these 67 houses to the main body of Merriott would be at least 1.5 miles away from the school, from the shop, and all the rest. Now, you go at great lengths in your report to outline the suitability of Crewken for the extension of housing, but nowhere do you actually refer to the village that this actually belongs to.
I think geographically it might be within the, it is within Merriott, but obviously it's on the edge of Crewken, which is the, I'm just going to, it's here, which is one of the primary market towns. So in sustainability terms, although it might be within Merriott, the parish, in terms of its closest, where it's located, in sustainability terms, it's on the edge of the development area of Crewken, the primary market town, which is a sustainable location for development.
But the sustainability of a village, obviously a village is the harmony of the sites within the village, and this is nowhere near it. It will almost be a part of Crewken rather than Merriott. And also the advantages of having this will be for Merriott and not for Crewken.
I think the issue we've got here is it's not a standalone issue. We've got an allocated part of the Chard Eastern development that's in Tatworth, but functionally and operationally will look into Chard rather than out to Tatworth. And in Yeovil we've got the Mudford Sustainable Extension, which is partly in Mudford Parish and partly in Yeovil, so it's not uncommon for the parish to butt up to the town, but the development to be looked at as something that feeds into the town rather than the parish. I'm aware that, you know, for things like Sill, there's this perverse issue that money goes away from where the public are likely to go, because the public here, I believe, would see themselves as being Crookham residents, so they will see Henhays as being their playfield, not the one in Merriott. That is a quirk of Sill, but, you know, within the 106, where there are open space projects, I think there is capacity for us to look at, are we looking at Crookham functionally and not Merriott?
I think I'll just comment on that. We're in West Coker here. You know, you're mixing land use and administrative lines. I don't think that's a planning issue. I don't think it's a land use issue. Got any other queries? Councillor Patrick.
Yes, a very quick question from me. It was just to do with the NHS contribution. There were two figures. One was £38,000, one was 25. I think you answered it, but I just wanted to make sure it was to do with the calculation excluding affordable housing, is that right?
Yeah, excluding affordable housing. And this is because the NHS, when they originally commented, they didn't realise that affordable housing was proposed. But because affordable housing occupants, they assume live in the catchment already, so already using NHS facilities, they base it on market housing, and that's how they do their calculations.
And if I could just add the corollary, I think you said earlier that that's enough for this site, and that the other sites and the fact that there's a deficit, that's the other sites that have that problem, not this one. Is that correct?
Chairman, I mean, the sort of the background is that the NHS has historically not engaged terribly well, which means we've got an issue where they are having to resource their own solutions. As I said, Councillor Best and I, between us, have been trying to find the right people in the wider NHS to look at Crookham holistically. And
I've always understood with outline design is acceptable on the site, plus you are agreeing the access arrangements. As we haven't got any sort of detailed technical plans, I would say we're not really in full possession of all the facts in order to make a sensible decision on this site. And I would have expected that, as access is a key part of the principle of accepting this site, that we actually need to be seeing those plans rather than sort of agreeing it blindly. Is there grounds for deferral here until the applicant or highways come back with detailed plans to address some of the concerns that have been raised? Because you're quite right, unless someone enforces it, just putting lines on a road won't stop people parking. And it is a perennial problem.
I think that's a good point, but it was the one I was trying to drive out earlier, in that this is where, roughly along the edge of the field, the access is, not it'll be this many lines, this long, and so far down. Could you please comment?
Yeah, so the plans submitted, which I think you can see up, you know, show the general form and the detail of the access. It's in any application, even where you've got, you know, even a full application, there'd still be kind of technical approvals through the section 278, I think it is, process. So that would deal with the minutiae of the curbs and the tactile pavings and everything. As I said, in highway safety terms, and when assessed against our policies and the MPPF, the Highways Authority have confirmed that this access as proposed is acceptable, and things like a box junction and traffic regulation order, which is proposed to be dealt with, which is a separate process, and it would need to be a pre-commencement, because it's not guaranteed that a traffic regulation order would be forthcoming. It would need to be within the Section 106 agreement as a pre-commencement, so before any development started, that they had that traffic regulation order in place, and that the technical detail would deal with the box junctions and things like that, which the Highways Authority have advised is happy, they're content for that to be dealt with at that stage. And based on the level of information here now, and this would be an approved plan, they're happy that it's acceptable in principle. And as you say, the outline establishes the principle of development, not the design, but the principle of that the site can accommodate up to 67 new homes, and the illustrative master plan, which is this plan here, shows how the site could be developed, and the parameter plans, which not that one, but this one, just sets certain parameters for development, so that development would need to be located within these yellow blocks, that the public open spaces where it's shown here, and that the hedgerows are retained as shown, so things like that.
So what I took from that was that it's our job to make sure that there is an agreement with the Highways Authority to do all of the work that's the detail work, not to do the detail work here. Is that correct? Because it's off-site, we've just got to do the principle of development, and the principle of that can be used as an entrance.
Yeah, and based on the plans that they've submitted, which kind of for a planning application is sufficient level of detail, but the more minutiae detail would be dealt with through the section 278.
Okay, Jenny? Microphone.
I don't. Thank you. Cheeky. I work at a school, and you've basically built a street across the road from a school for people to park, and they won't park sensibly. They will abandon cars. It doesn't matter whether you've got yellow lines. It doesn't matter if you've got a PSSO sat out there. They will still park ridiculously. I also have concerns about the doctors and the schools being full. I know you said that they're going to financially contribute, but that doesn't mean they're going to have any extra doctors or any extra space in the school. You can't just vamoose teachers from out of nowhere. I don't like the Wildlife Trust. They've objected with a list of reasons which you can all see. That's about it.
Be sort of guided by the more local members on that. But bearing in mind the sensitivity and the nature of the issues raised, we are talking about, you know, young people, safety, and that is clearly a concern. Do we have any right as a committee to actually ask that the more detailed designs do come to us, so we are content in our own minds that the access is acceptable, and therefore, along with the principle of development, and therefore it can be approved if that is what the committee decides?
Can we have some clear guidance from the planners on the matter before us?
I mean, because the Highways Authority, who are, you know, are experts in this, and if it, say it got refused on those grounds and went to appeal, the Highways Authority haven't raised an objection, they think it's acceptable. So, you know, if say we were to refuse it on those grounds, that might be difficult to you know, make a case for when the Highways Authority haven't raised any objection to it. That's all I said. And you know, the Highways Authority haven't required any more information at this stage to overcome any objections they did have, because they've confirmed that they don't have any objections.
So, just to confirm...
Sorry. Steve.
Yeah. So, just to get this right in my mind, highways just consider whether they can put yellow lines on that bit of road. Do they consider where the cars are going to go? Because there's still going to be the same number of cars coming up there, parking in the side streets and crossing the roads as well. I don't. Has that actually been? Has that been even considered? I'm not sure.
I mean, the point in the issue obviously is creating an access there, and having parking on either side of an access would then create a conflict potentially with pedestrians and cyclists. So it's to make sure that that junction is safe. You know, to a certain extent, it's up to people who are dropping their kids off to make sure they do park in a safe way. And, you know, I mean, that falls outside the remit, really, of the planning process to ensure that...
It's one of the reasons that the MPPF kind of introduced this sort of severe test as opposed to just harm, because, you know, whenever you add development, unless you're in the most urban-centric city and no car environments, you're introducing cars, and you're introducing them into a street environment that wasn't conceived of with that many cars. So the sort of the test for the highway officer is that the adverse impact is at the severe stage, not just change or slightly worse, and it's quite a high test. The other thing that was also sort of included in the guidance was, again, that you set aside those things that happen periodically. So like the bin van, you don't design around the bin van simply because of it needing to move around, and you design everything around that one instance. So, you know, there was a reality that most of our villages, for 15 minutes at the start and end of the school day, are appalling places to try and park. And the same will go for the sort of larger schools. But it is that period when it's the arrival and drop-off, and it's not the bulk of the day.
Councillor Best.
Right. On the highways, the Highways Department seemed to have amnesia on one thing for this road. Some years ago, a scheme for making one way for North Street was put together, and the Highways Department spent £30,000 for 106 to design it. They would not implement it until the Quayside Road is in. It will mean that on the junction of the end of Ashlands Road, there will be traffic lights. And from there, the traffic then will back straight across this entrance. And also, the implication is that more traffic will be coming up through Ashlands Road because it won't be able to go into the town via North Street. But for some reason, this hasn't been included.
So I know, again, I think you raised this specifically with the highways officer, so they did consider this, and in their
horrifying thought of the traffic. Now, whether if this went to appeal, this same principle would apply to the thought of this traffic coming out opposite a school entrance is something which we have to decide on. Some of us probably think, yes, it would. Some might not. But that is the only thing I think, Chairman, we should be voting on, actually, is whether that A, we agree to the principle of development and then vote on the access.
Unfortunately, we can't deal with it quite like that. We've had advice from the officer about the high bar that's set for highways objections, and we've also had clear advice from the highways. And I'm afraid that clear advice from highways does seem to actually refute the objection that was brought up. So unless somebody's got some other points of debate, I think we ought to move to a vote on this. So I'll move from the chair the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Okay, in that case, let's move to a vote that the application before us is approved with the conditions in the officer's report. Those showing in favour, please.
And the Section 106.
And the Section 106 agreements. And those against? And those abstaining? No abstentions? Okay. Can we do that again, please, because we haven't got the right numbers. Those in favour of the officer's the report of the officer's recommendations, can you show again, please? And those against? Okay, thank you. Okay, so that puts us in the awkward position of a reason for refusal. So do we have somebody who's willing to propose a reason for refusal? Councillor Best.
It can only be on the access. And that's the only thing. I know we're going against the highways, but you have the detail of the increase of children at the school, the situation with not using the loop, and I think it doesn't conform to a safer access. Sorry.
Do we have a seconder for refusal? Ms. Grounds? Okay.
Approve the A30.
The A30 junction was not a dangerous
That's not
junction.
what we're debating tonight.
No, I'm just,
So
you
it's- so-
did comment on it.
But it's not what we're debating tonight.
No, it's just answering his question.
What we're trying to do now is to put a reason for refusal behind our decision to refuse. Can I ask you to comment, John?
Yeah, Chairman. I mean, you know, this is one of those classic cases when it goes to appeal where the cross-examination is saying, well, why don't you believe your own people? And just being suspicious isn't necessarily a very good defence. I mean, if you were minded to go down that route, my feeling is it would be probably better to defer and invite the Highways Officer to attend the committee, because you know, he is now part of your organisation. Before, we couldn't make them come. But in that issue, you need to understand what will he say if there's an appeal. And if he says, I'm not going to be anywhere near it, you just need to be aware that, you know, you need to find another expert who may or may not be able to present your case. Otherwise, it's a costly decision. So I really think that now that we are a unitary, seeking to get a highway representative to deal with this one point would make more sense than issuing a refusal, which we actually have no evidence, but we have suspicion about.
I note your point. I see two hands up immediately.
Did you want, if you want a recommendation or a second, I'll...
Chairman, I was going to go back
Sorry, Beth,
to
then
my...
Osborne, then Snell.
I was
please.
going to go back to, I think I sort of raised this earlier, could we not ask...
Is abstaining? Thank you very much. We have one more matter on the agenda, which is the timing of the of future meetings. I think this illustrates the point, though. The reason that item was there was so perhaps I could just say why it was there, and we can defer debate on it till the next meeting. But the reason it was there was because it's quite obvious we are going to be dealing with meeting applications for some time at this committee, both because of the scheme of delegation and because of the backlog that we've built up, and they will require intense scrutiny. And my proposal was to actually nominate a second date, so we had a reserved date, so that we could go for fewer, shorter meetings and also overcome some of the committee clashes which occur. So that was why the item was there. Can we defer that to the next meeting? Are we all agreed? In that case,
Sorry, it's our full council meeting to approve the governance on that night of the next meeting. So if you defer it, I won't be here, I'm afraid.
which was why I wanted two meetings debated, but